Hello, sleepy traveller. Tuck yourself in, dim the room, and prepare for a peaceful drift through uneventful history. And if you feel like these videos are of any use to you, then you can like and subscribe, but only if you really feel like it. And now, let's begin. Back in biblical times, weddings were less about romance and more like a high-stakes game of Monopoly where properties were swapped and alliances forged through the strategic exchange of goats and silver. Forget the love-struck couple gazing into each other's eyes. The real action happened around a table where families haggled over dowries like they were at a Middle Eastern bazaar. The heart of marriage economics was the dowry system, a concept modern couples might find as romantic as a tax audit, but crucial in knitting the fabric of society. Let's talk cold hard cash, or more accurately, livestock and silver shekels. In this era, love was a luxury few could afford, and the practicalities of marriage were a pressing concern. The dowry wasn't just a wedding gift, it was more like a financial insurance policy, ensuring the bride's future security. It was a reflection of a family's wealth, with the average dowry often consisting of livestock, land, or even servants. In fact, Genesis 24,022 mentions Rebekah receiving a gold nose ring weighing half a shekel and 2 bracelets weighing 10 shekels of gold. That's some serious bling, roughly equivalent to 110 grams of gold today, or about $6,000 at current gold prices. You see, weddings in biblical times were less about the union of 2 hearts and more about the merger of 2 clans. Like a strategic business acquisition, they were all about assets, heirs, and alliances. If love happened to blossom, well, that was just a bonus. The real fireworks were in the negotiations, where fathers and uncles debated the virtues of their cattle like Wall Street brokers on a bull market day. The price of a bride could vary greatly depending on her family's status and wealth, ranging from a few sheep to entire herds. Forget about bridal magazines. The best wedding planner was a good shepherd. Now, the allure of the dowry lies in its mythic portrayal. The tale of Jacob working 7 years for Rachel's hand is often told as a love story. But let's not forget, Laban, Rachel's father, pulled a fast one and swapped Rachel for her sister Leah at the altar, forcing Jacob to work another 7 years for his true love. That's 14 years of labor, double the trouble no less. It's like your boss saying, you'll get that promotion you've been working for, but first, here's another decade of unpaid overtime. Romantic? Perhaps, but also a testament to the cutthroat dynamics of family alliances. The dowry system was a social contract, sealing the deal between 2 families. It wasn't just about wealth, it was about social status and security. A daughter's marriage could elevate a family's standing or cement alliances with powerful neighbors. Picture a medieval LinkedIn, where connections were built not with endorsements, but with sheep and land. This was a world where daughters were often pawns in a larger game of social chess, moved around the board to secure the best possible future for their kin. Economic realities of the time ensured that the dowry was more than just a one-off payment. It acted as a safety net for women, who, in the absence of modern-day equality laws, relied heavily on their families for support. If a marriage fell apart or a husband died, the white dowry was her lifeline, a safeguard against financial ruin. It was her ticket to maintaining some semblance of independence in a society that didn't exactly roll out the red carpet for single women. Let's not forget that the bride price, or moha, was also a significant part of these negotiations. This was a sum paid by the groom to the bride's family, essentially compensating them for the loss of a household member. In essence, it was the original prenup, a legally binding agreement that ensured everyone got their fair share and no one ended up flipping tables over family dinners. The Bible gives us a glimpse into this practice in Exodus 2016-17, where a man seducing a virgin must pay the bride price, securing her status and his own reputation. So, what's the takeaway from this matrimonial market? It's that weddings in biblical times were transactional by nature, grounded in the gritty realities of the day. They were less about the bride and groom holding hands under a canopy of flowers, and more about ensuring the family's continued prosperity and security. Love might have been in the air, but so was the smell of freshly traded livestock. In a world where survival depended on strategic alliances, marriages were the glue that held communities together. Each union was a microcosm of broader socio-economic and political dynamics, where the merging of two families often meant the merging of their resources, strengths, and weaknesses. It was a pragmatic approach to matrimony, one that prioritized continuity over companionship. The romance of biblical weddings might be more myth than reality, but there's something undeniably captivating about the practicalities of it all. The dowry system was a testament to the ingenuity of ancient societies, crafting a model of marriage that, while far from the fairy tales of today, ensured the survival and prosperity of generations. And perhaps, in its own way, there's a kind of romance in that too. A romance born not of whimsy, but of wisdom. Speaking of romance born of wisdom, let's roll back the veil on wedding preparations in biblical times, or should we say, let's lift the dust catcher, masquerading as a bridal veil. You see, the ancient world wasn't big on the traditions we romanticize today. In fact, much of what we associate with weddings now has practical and sometimes downright unglamorous origins. The bridal veil, for instance, was less about mystery and more about protecting the bride from the elements. Imagine walking through a dusty village street in the Middle East. You'd want something to keep the sand out of your eyes too. Now, picking the perfect wedding date back then wasn't as simple as finding an auspicious day on a calendar. It required a bit more logistical finesse. In a time before Google calendars and digital invites, planning involved aligning with agricultural cycles, religious observances, and the availability of the entire village. Yes, the entire village, because when life hands you little entertainment, a wedding becomes the social event of the season. It wasn't just about exchanging vows, it was about throwing down a feast that would leave everyone talking for weeks. It's like the original block party, only with more goats and fewer noise complaints. Speaking of logistics, let's talk matchmakers. The ancient world's version of Tinder, minus the swipes but with all the strategic matchmaking you'd expect from a savvy app. Matchmakers in biblical times were the ultimate networkers. They weren't just setting up couples based on mutual interests or star signs. They were aligning family interests, negotiating dowries, and ensuring the union would benefit both clans. Think of them as the unsung heroes of social engineering, savvy enough to rival any modern-day Cupid with a spreadsheet. But let's not sugarcoat it. The role of a matchmaker wasn't all about love connections and happily ever afters. In reality, it was more like playing a high-stakes game of chess, where each move had to be calculated to secure alliances and fortify family standings. The matchmaker's task was to ensure that the bride's family didn't lose out on a lucrative connection, or, heaven forbid, that the groom's family didn't end up with an unsuitable partner. It was a delicate balancing act, a blend of diplomacy and psychology, with a dash of good old-fashioned haggling thrown in. In many ways, their job description hasn't changed much, just swap sheep for social media profiles. Now, on to the party planning itself. While today's weddings often involve a year of meticulous planning, back in biblical times, the process was dictated by more immediate concerns. The menu, for instance, was less about impressing guests with gourmet cuisine and more about what was available from last year's harvest, what livestock could be spared, and what the season had to offer. Forget about choosing between chicken or fish. Guests were lucky if they got a hearty stew and plenty of bread. But what they lacked in culinary variety, they made up for in enthusiasm and, let's be honest, copious amounts of wine. After all, what's a wedding without a little fermented grape juice to keep the festivities lively? And who could forget the guest list? In an era without email or postal services, the invitation was a more communal affair. Word of mouth was the social media of the day, and a wedding was everyone's business. The entire village would show up, not just because they got an invite, but because they heard a goat bleating in a suspiciously festive tone. Besides, in small communities, declining an invitation wasn't just rude, it was practically unheard of. Who wouldn't want to partake in the communal celebration and exchange of news, gossip, and maybe a little matchmaking on the side? The reality of wedding preparations in biblical times was that they were as much about community cohesion as they were about family alliances. These events were opportunities for the village to come together, celebrate, and reinforce social ties. The wedding wasn't just about the bride and groom. It was a stage for the entire community to reaffirm its bonds, to share in a moment of joy amidst the hardships of daily life. It was a spectacle, a feast, and a communal rite of passage rolled into one. And so, the myth of the romantic, intimate wedding gives way to the reality of a bustling, lively celebration that was both pragmatic and necessary. It was a grand performance where every participant had a role to play, from the matchmaker to the village elders, each contributing to the success of the event. In this way, the wedding was not just a personal milestone but a communal achievement, a testament to the resilience and unity of the community. Through this lens, the grandeur of the biblical wedding isn't found in lavishness or luxury, but in the enduring human spirit and the shared joy of connection. So, as we peel back the layers of history and dust off the veils of myth, we find that the weddings of biblical times were far from the romanticized versions we often imagine. They were grounded in the realities of the era, shaped by economic necessity, social strategy, and a deep-rooted sense of community. But perhaps there's a romance in that too. A romance that lies not in the fleeting emotions of love, but in the enduring bonds of family and community and the shared journey of life. And as we continue to explore these ancient traditions, we uncover not just the past, but reflections of our own world, where connections are still at the heart of our celebrations. Now, as we slide down the timeline, let's dive into the actual wedding ceremony itself. If you thought modern ceremonies were a marathon of toasts and awkward dance moves, biblical weddings might have you rethinking your stamina. Picture a procession that could rival the opening ceremony of the Olympics. But instead of athletes, you have a parade of family members, animals, and maybe a few nosy neighbors who didn't get the memo about not crashing weddings. The bride and groom's journey to the ceremony wasn't just a casual stroll down the aisle. Oh no, it was a full-blown event. For the bride, the procession was akin to a royal tour. She would be decked out in her finest, often adorned with jewelry that screamed, "Look at me, I'm worth every sheep and shekel. Remember Rebecca's gold bling from Genesis?" It wasn't just for show. It was a statement piece, like wearing a Rolex that says, "I've arrived." The procession itself was a public spectacle, complete with musicians and singers to announce the couple's impending nuptials. Think of it as the ancient version of a wedding hashtag, only louder and with more tambourines. Let's not forget the exchange of gifts, which wasn't just a token of goodwill, but a crucial part of sealing the marital deal. Gifts were exchanged between families with the seriousness of a summit meeting. While today's wedding gifts might include toasters and fine china, back then it was all about the livestock, textiles, and precious metals. The groom's family would present gifts to the bride's family as part of the bride price, a bit like saying, "Here's a down payment on your daughter." In return, the bride's family might offer gifts to the groom's family, not unlike a reciprocal goodwill gesture. It was a mutual exchange that solidified alliances, with each side ensuring they didn't get shortchanged in the deal. Now, on to the festivities. Let's talk about the real star of the show, wine. If you thought wine was a mere accompaniment at weddings, think again. It was the ultimate guest of honor, flowing more freely than the conversation. Wine wasn't just a drink. It was an experience, a social lubricant that turned solemn ceremonies into jubilant celebrations. The biblical wedding at Cana, where Jesus famously turned water into wine, underscores wine's centrality to these festivities. Forget dance floors and DJs. Wine was the original catalyst for breaking the ice and getting everyone onto the proverbial dance floor, or at least into a spirited debate about whose goat was the fattest. Now, let's bust a myth or two, starting with the idea of wedding cake. If you're picturing a towering confection of layers and icing, think again. The closest thing to a wedding cake in biblical times was probably a stack of flatbreads. Cake as we know it didn't exist, so instead of cutting the cake, you'd be breaking bread, literally. The feast was more about sustenance than spectacle, with bread, meats, and whatever the harvest could muster taking centre stage. As for the notion that everyone was having a jolly good time, well, let's temper that enthusiasm. Sure, there was joy and celebration, but there was also an element of public duty. Weddings were as much about community as they were about the couple. People showed up because it was expected, not necessarily because they were close friends with the bride and groom. It was a social obligation, a chance to reinforce community bonds and show face. So while some guests might have been genuinely thrilled, others were probably just there for the free meal and a chance to size up the local gossip. The ceremony itself was a tapestry of rites and rituals, each with its own meaning and significance. From the breaking of the glass, a tradition that traces its roots to Jewish weddings as a reminder of life's fragility, to the exchange of vows, these acts were infused with symbolism. They were less about the couple's personal journey and more about their new role within the social framework. the wedding was a public declaration, a way of saying, we are now part of this community and we're here to contribute to its future. In this way, weddings in biblical times were less about personal fulfillment and more about fulfilling a societal role. They were a means of ensuring continuity and cohesion within the community. The romance of it all might be more historical fiction than fact, but there's a beauty in the practicality and the way these ceremonies serve to bind people together in a shared narrative. So, as we unravel the intricate fabric of biblical weddings, we see a picture that's far from the fairy tales of today. It's a world where love and duty are intertwined, where the personal and the communal are inextricably linked. And while the myths of romance endure, the reality is a fascinating glimpse into a society that valued connection and continuity above all else. As we continue this journey through history, we'll explore how these ancient practices laid the groundwork for the traditions we hold dear today, revealing the timeless nature of human relationships and the enduring quest for connection. As we leave behind the ceremonial splendor and dive into the post-wedding festivities, it's time to loosen those belts. Figuratively, of course, given that ancient attire wasn't exactly known for its waist-cinching properties. This is where the party really kicks off. And by party, I mean a celebration that could last up to a week. Yes, you heard right. 7 days of feasting, dancing, and enough wine to make even Dionysus raise an eyebrow. The modern-day concept of a one-night wedding reception pales in comparison to this epic marathon of merriment. But before you start imagining a biblical version of Coachella, let's talk logistics. First off, the wedding feast wasn't just a casual affair. It was a Herculean task of planning and preparation that would make even the most seasoned event planner break into a sweat. Imagine feeding an entire village plus extended family, and you're getting close. The menu was dictated by the season and the harvest, so forget about sushi or canapes. Think roasted lamb, barley bread, figs and dates. A Mediterranean smorgasbord with a side of olive oil. The highlight? Wine, of course, which flowed as freely as the gossip. Wine was the social lubricant that kept the conversational wheels turning, and with the average amphora holding about 26 litres, there was plenty to keep the party going. And oh, the dancing! While today's weddings might feature a choreographed first dance or a DJ spinning the latest hits, biblical weddings had something a bit more organic. The dancing was communal and spontaneous, often involving everyone from toddlers to elders. No one was off the hook. The music came from lyres, tambourines and flutes, setting a rhythm that even the most rhythmically challenged among us could follow. Picture a scene where your great-aunt is busting moves alongside the village chief, and you've got the right idea. But here's where we bust another myth, the notion that everyone was having the time of their lives. Sure, there was joy and laughter, but there were also social obligations and hierarchies at play. Weddings were a stage for everyone to see and be seen, a chance to reinforce alliances and flaunt wealth. The richer the family, the more elaborate the celebration, with some families going bankrupt in the process. It was the ancient equivalent of keeping up with the biblical Kardashians, where the pressure to impress could lead to financial hangovers that lasted long after the wine had run dry. Speaking of hangovers, the literal kind was as common then as it is now. With wine being the beverage of choice, it's safe to say that the morning after might have been a bit rough for some of the revellers. And since aspirin wasn't exactly on the menu, recovery was probably a matter of toughing it out and hoping that the next round of festivities would offer some distraction. The social implications of these celebrations were profound. Weddings were not just personal milestones, but public spectacles that reinforced community ties. In a world where survival often depended on the goodwill and cooperation of your neighbours, these events were crucial for maintaining social cohesion. They were opportunities to forge new alliances, settle old scores, and renew communal bonds. In many ways, they were the glue that held society together, reminding everyone of their place within the social order. Now, let's draw some comparisons to today's wedding standards. While modern couples might spend a small fortune on a one-day affair, the biblical approach was more of a long-term investment in social capital. The festivities served as a way to broadcast a family's status and influence, a public declaration of their place in the community. The more lavish the celebration, the more respect and prestige it garnered. But unlike today's focus on Instagram-worthy moments, the true value lay in the relationships forged and reinforced. So, as we peel back the layers of this ancient tradition, we find a complex web of economic, social, and political factors at play. Weddings were not just about the union of two individuals, but the merging of two families and, by extension, two communities. They were a celebration of continuity and cohesion, a testament to the enduring power of human connection. As we continue this journey through the annals of history, let's keep our eyes peeled for more tales of romance and reality. The post-wedding festivities offer a rich tapestry of insights into the human experience, revealing the timeless quest for connection and belonging. And while the specifics may have changed over the centuries, the essence of what it means to come together in celebration remains as relevant today as it ever was. So, stay tuned as we delve deeper into the stories and traditions that continue to shape our understanding of love and community. As the music fades and the final amphora of wine is emptied, the guests shuffle out, leaving behind the echoes of laughter and perhaps a few misplaced sandals. The newlyweds, now the center of a different kind of attention, are left to face the reality that follows the festivities. Spoiler alert, this isn't the part where they ride off into the sunset on a white steed, hand in hand. Nope, biblical marriage was more about the dawn of a new set of responsibilities than it was about romantic bliss. First up, societal expectations. Let's get one thing straight. The honeymoon period in biblical times was less about sipping coconut water on a sandy beach and more about settling into the rhythm of everyday life. The newlywed couple was expected to integrate into the husband's household, which often meant living with his extended family. Picture your in-laws dropping by unexpectedly, only it's not unexpected because they live in the next room. It's a scenario that would test even the strongest of modern marriages. For the bride, this transition was akin to joining a new team where she had to quickly learn the playbook or risk spending a lot of time warming the bench. Her role was crucial, not just as a partner, but as a potential mother and manager of the household. The biblical household wasn't just a cozy family unit, it was a mini-economic enterprise. Women were responsible for everything from weaving textiles to managing the hearth, which was the ancient equivalent of running a small business. Talk about multitasking. As for the legal implications, marriage was less about love and more about contract law. Forget the romance novels. This was a merger, complete with legally binding agreements. The dowry and bride price we talked about earlier weren't just ceremonial gifts, they were concrete elements of a binding contract. If a marriage ended, that is, if the husband decided to issue a get or divorce document, the dowry was a safety net for the woman. Think of it as an ancient form of alimony, ensuring she wasn't left penniless. The stakes were high, and so were the social ramifications of a marriage breakdown. And let's not gloss over the happily ever after myth. In a society where life expectancy hovered around 30 to 40 years, this ever after was often cut short. The reality was that mortality rates were high, and the spectre of illness and death loomed large. Love, if it blossomed, was often underscored by the ever-present shadow of loss. It was a gritty, unvarnished view of marriage, a partnership forged in the crucible of life's harsh realities. Now, let's compare this to our modern concept of marital bliss. Today, happily ever after often conjures images of picket fences and breakfast in bed, but the biblical version was more about survival and community. The marriage was a cornerstone of societal structure, a way to ensure the continuation of family lines and the stability of the community. The couple's success was the community's success, their failure a communal concern. It's a far cry from the individualistic approach we often see today, where marriage is sometimes more about personal fulfillment than social obligation. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite the pragmatic undertones, there's a timeless appeal to these unions. The communal focus, the shared responsibilities, these are elements that resonate even now, albeit in different forms. Sure, we romanticize the past, painting it in nostalgic hues, but there's wisdom in those ancient practices. They underscore the importance of partnership, collaboration, and resilience, qualities that are just as relevant in today's world. And let's not forget the legacy of these unions. While the romantic ideal might be more myth than reality, the marriages of biblical times have left an indelible mark on history. They laid the groundwork for societal structures that continue to influence us today. The legal frameworks, the social contracts, the emphasis on community. These are threads that weave through the tapestry of human history, connecting the past to the present. In wrapping up this journey through biblical weddings, we've pulled back the curtain on a world that was complex, pragmatic, and deeply rooted in the realities of the time. While the myths of romance endure, the truth is a fascinating glimpse into the human experience, a reminder that love, in all its forms, is shaped by the world around us. As we close the book on this chapter, let's carry forward the lessons of resilience, connection, and continuity. And remember that while the specifics may change, the essence of what it means to come together in celebration is timeless. Cleopatra VII. Cleopatra was never just your average queen. She was the last pharaoh of Egypt, a woman whose name still echoes through the halls of history with the kind of drama and intrigue usually reserved for reality TV. But before she was Cleopatra, the femme fatale of the ancient world, she was simply a kid growing up in one of the most dysfunctional families in history, a family that made the Lannisters look like the Brady Bunch. Born in 69 BCE, Cleopatra was thrust into a political landscape that was about as stable as a three-legged chair. Her family, the Ptolemies, had been running Egypt since Alexander the Great's general, Ptolemy I Soter, decided to set up shop there in 305 BCE. The Ptolemies were Greeks, ruling over Egyptians, which was like trying to sell ice to Eskimos, but with more backstabbing. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy VI, was known as Auletes, or the flute player, not because he was musically gifted, but because he was about as effective a ruler as a flute is a weapon. He was so unpopular that he was booted out of Egypt faster than you could say coup d'etat, leaving the young Cleopatra to pick up the pieces. But Cleopatra wasn't just another pretty face in a royal portrait. She had the brains too, and she used them. By the age of 14, she was already co-ruling with her father, which was no small feat, considering she was sharing power with a man who was perpetually on the run from his own subjects. As a teenager, Cleopatra's life was less about teenage angst and more about political survival. She was educated in Alexandria, the cosmopolitan hub of the ancient world, where she was schooled in philosophy, mathematics, and astronomy. Talk about a killer resume. Now, here's a juicy tidbit that often gets overshadowed by her legendary beauty. Cleopatra spoke at least 9 languages. 9. Greek, Egyptian, Aramaic, and even some ancient Persian and Hebrew for good measure. She was the original Rosetta Stone. This linguistic prowess wasn't just for impressing at dinner parties, it was a strategic tool. By speaking the native Egyptian language, she connected with her subjects in a way her predecessors never bothered to. Cleopatra knew that being a ruler was more than just sitting on a throne, it was about understanding and communicating with the people you governed. The Ptolemaic dynasty was a hotbed of intrigue, and Cleopatra's family dynamics were as tangled as a basket of snakes. Her siblings were both her allies and her fiercest rivals, a classic case of sibling rivalry on steroids. When her father died in 51 BCE, Cleopatra found herself co-ruling with her 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII. Yes, you heard that right. A teenager and a kid were in charge of Egypt. It was like a historical version of Home Alone, but with more politics and less pizza. But Cleopatra was no pushover. She was determined to maintain her grip on power, even if it meant playing a game of political chess where the stakes were life and death. She was shrewd enough to recognize the importance of aligning herself with Rome, the superpower of the day. And she was right. In a world where Rome was the sun and everyone else was just a planet in its orbit, Cleopatra knew that keeping close to the Romans was her best bet for survival. However, Cleopatra's ascent to power was far from smooth sailing. Her brother, Ptolemy III, backed by his advisors, decided he was done being the junior partner in their ruling duo and kicked Cleopatra out of Alexandria in 48 BCE. Cleopatra, not one to sulk in the desert, started assembling her own army. You know, like any teenage girl would when she's been grounded, except with more mercenaries and fewer slumber parties. Cleopatra's return to power was nothing short of legendary. She didn't just stroll back into Alexandria, she made an entrance that would put any Hollywood starlet to shame. Wrapped in a carpet, or, as some sources suggest, a sack, she was delivered to Julius Caesar himself. Caesar, who was in town to sort out the mess that was the Ptolemaic family feud, was charmed by Cleopatra's boldness, intelligence, and, let's be honest, her audacity. This meeting would kickstart one of the most famous partnerships in history, but that's a story for another day. So, Let's set the record straight. Cleopatra was more than a seductress draped in gold and eyeliner. She was a political powerhouse from the get-go. Her early life was a masterclass in surviving and thriving in a world dominated by power plays and palace intrigues. She wasn't just playing a Game of Thrones, she was inventing it. And while history often remembers her for her relationships with powerful men, it was Cleopatra's own cunning and intellect that truly set her apart. As a young girl thrust into the chaos of Egyptian politics, she proved that she was more than capable of holding her own, one calculated move at a time. Cleopatra's bold move of wrapping herself up like an ancient Amazon delivery and rolling out to Caesar was just the opening act. You see, Cleopatra's alliances with Rome's top brass weren't heart-fluttering tales of romance. They were calculated gambits, the kind you'd expect from a woman who played politics like a grandmaster plays chess. While poets and playwrights have spun Cleopatra as some kind of ancient world siren, the reality was far more Machiavellian. She was playing a high-stakes game where the prizes were power and survival, not roses and chocolates. Let's start with Julius Caesar, the man who was more familiar with power struggles than anyone else in the Roman arena. By the time Cleopatra made her dramatic re-entry into Alexandria in 48 BCE, Caesar was already knee-deep in his own civil war back in Rome. His decision to back Cleopatra wasn't just because he was charmed by her intellect and charisma, although let's face it, she was as cunning as a fox in a henhouse, but because it served his interests too. By reinstating Cleopatra to the throne, Caesar secured a valuable ally in Egypt, a land that was essentially the breadbasket of the ancient Mediterranean. Egypt's fertile Nile delta was the agricultural jackpot that could feed the ever-hungry Roman populace. In other words, Cleopatra's partnership with Caesar was less about star-crossed lovers and more about strategic bread and circuses. Their alliance wasn't just a political win-win, it was an economic power move. With Caesar's support, Cleopatra was able to stabilize her reign and secure Egypt's independence from the overbearing reach of Rome, a feat not unlike trying to keep a small fish from being swallowed by a whale. In return, Egypt's grain shipments were a lifeline for Caesar's ambitions. It was a symbiotic relationship where Cleopatra got to keep her throne and Caesar got a steady supply of grain to keep the Roman mob happy. Forget about candlelit dinners. This was the kind of romance that happened over trade agreements and military alliances. Oh, and as a side note, Cleopatra did bear Caesar a son, Ptolemy XV, Philopator Philometor Caesar, or as history books like to call him, Caesarion. But let's not kid ourselves into thinking this was your average family setup. Caesar never officially acknowledged Caesarion as his heir. Rome was a republic, after all, and the idea of a hereditary monarchy was about as popular as a lead balloon. Nevertheless, Cleopatra saw Caesarion as a living, breathing insurance policy, a blend of Egyptian and Roman blood that she hoped would one day cement her dynasty's future. Fast forward a few years, and enter stage left Mark Antony, another Roman powerhouse who was no stranger to the cutthroat world of politics. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, a whole other drama involving daggers and betrayal, the power vacuum in Rome was palpable. Antony, part of the Second Triumvirate alongside Octavian and Lepidus, was looking to secure his own piece of the Roman pie. Cleopatra saw an opportunity and seized it with both hands. Her relationship with Antony was not just a sequel to her Roman adventures, it was an entirely different ballgame. Antony needed resources and military might to solidify his power in the eastern provinces, and Cleopatra had both. She was like an ancient-day financier, with a fleet of ships and a treasury that could bankroll Antony's ambitions. In return, Antony promised Cleopatra control over several territories, including Cyprus and parts of the Middle East. It was like monopoly, but with real countries and armies. Their union wasn't just about passion, it was about creating a formidable political and military alliance that could stand toe-to-toe with Octavian, the future Augustus Caesar. The economic benefits of this partnership were significant. Egypt, under Cleopatra's rule, was not just a fertile crescent of agriculture, but also a hub of commerce and trade. The wealth of Egypt wasn't just built on grain, it was a vibrant marketplace of spices, textiles, and other luxuries that flowed across the Mediterranean. By aligning with Antony, Cleopatra ensured that her kingdom remained a key player in the region's economy, a dazzling jewel that attracted traders and diplomats alike. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Their partnership sparked controversy back in Rome. where Antony's political enemies, led by Octavian, painted Cleopatra as a foreign seductress who had bewitched Antony. The Roman people were regaled with tales of Antony's so-called debauchery in the exotic East, a narrative that conveniently ignored the political acumen Cleopatra wielded. In truth, Cleopatra and Antony's relationship was as much about power dynamics as it was about personal connection. They were two of the most powerful figures of their time, and their union was as strategic as it was infamous. In 34 BCE, Antony and Cleopatra staged the famous Donations of Alexandria, a grand ceremony where they distributed territories among their children, essentially drawing a line in the sand against Octavian. This event was more than just a public relations spectacle. It was a bold declaration of their ambitions to reshape the political landscape of the ancient world. Antony and Cleopatra positioned themselves as not just rulers, but as a dynasty that could rival Rome itself. But here's the kicker. While Cleopatra and Antony were busy carving out their domains, Octavian was not sitting idle. He was back in Rome, skillfully manipulating public opinion, portraying Antony as a traitor, and Cleopatra as the wicked queen pulling the strings. It was a masterclass in propaganda that would ultimately set the stage for the epic showdown at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. A story for another day, but let's just say it didn't end with a happily ever after. So, what's the takeaway from Cleopatra's strategic alliances? She was a political virtuoso who understood the power of partnerships, leveraging them to secure her reign and Egypt's sovereignty. In a world where alliances could make or break empires, Cleopatra played her hand with finesse and foresight. Her relationships with Caesar and Antony weren't just romantic escapades, they were calculated moves in the grand chessboard of ancient politics. Cleopatra was a queen who knew how to turn the tides in her favor, one alliance at a time. Now, pivoting from Cleopatra's high-stakes game of political poker with Rome's heavyweights, let's dive into her domestic wizardry. It wasn't all Roman romance and Mediterranean maneuvers. Cleopatra had a kingdom to run, and she did it with the finesse of a CEO who's also the face of a global brand. Egypt, under her reign, wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, and that's no small feat considering the ancient world's cutthroat geopolitical climate. Cleopatra's domestic policies were as much a testament to her intellect as her infamous love life was to her charisma. First, let's debunk a persistent myth. Cleopatra was not some seductive siren whose sole talent was turning Roman knees to jelly. She was a shrewd administrator, juggling economic reforms like a pro. Her primary focus? The Nile River, Egypt's lifeline and its most potent economic asset. Cleopatra understood that the Nile's annual floods were the kingdom's bread and butter, or should we say, beer and barley. So she invested in improving irrigation systems and agricultural practices. These reforms ensured that Egypt remained the granary of the Mediterranean, a status that kept both her coffers and her Roman allies well-fed and content. Cleopatra's economic strategy was nothing short of brilliant. She knew that a stable economy was the backbone of political power, and her plans reflected this understanding. By revamping Egypt's taxation system, she ensured a steady flow of revenue into the state treasury. This wasn't your typical tax the peasants and run scenario. Cleopatra implemented a more equitable system where tax rates were based on land productivity. Such foresight not only bolstered the kingdom's finances, but also kept the populace relatively happy, or at least less inclined to revolt. Now, Cleopatra's approach to governance was another stroke of genius. She wasn't the type to rule from an ivory tower. She was on the ground, speaking the local dialect, engaging directly with her people, a move that set her apart from her Ptolemaic predecessors who preferred Greek to Egyptian like it was the language of the gods. This linguistic prowess was more than a party trick. It was a strategic move that solidified her rule over a culturally diverse Egypt. By connecting with her subjects in their tongue, Cleopatra didn't just rule, she led, and there's a world of difference between the two. In terms of public relations, Cleopatra was miles ahead of her time. She had a knack for branding that would make modern marketers weep with envy. Consider her legendary entrance into Tarsus to meet Mark Antony, where she sailed up the Cydnus River on a barge adorned like a floating palace, complete with purple sails and a golden canopy. It was the kind of entrance that screamed power and opulence, a bold statement designed to capture the imagination of onlookers and solidify her image as a living goddess. Cleopatra didn't just cultivate an image, she embodied it, transforming herself into a symbol of Egypt's grandeur and divine right to rule. But let's not forget the harsh realities behind the glamour. Cleopatra's reign was marked by constant challenges, not least of which was securing her position in a male-dominated world. She navigated a labyrinth of court politics, familial betrayals, and foreign threats with a deftness that was both impressive and necessary. Her alliances with Rome were not mere flirtations, but crucial lifelines that allowed her to maintain Egypt's independence against mounting pressures. Cleopatra had to be as sharp as an Alexandrian dagger just to keep her head above water, and she did so with remarkable agility. Now, the story of Cleopatra's death is as steeped in myth as her life, with the famed snakebite suicide often taking centre stage. But let's roll our eyes at this dramatic tale for a moment. The reality is that we don't have concrete evidence of how Cleopatra died, and the snakebite theory might be more Shakespearean flair than historical fact. Some historians suggest she used poison, while others propose it was a more mundane form of suicide or even murder orchestrated by Octavian's agents. Whatever the case, Cleopatra's death marked the end of an era and the beginning of Roman domination over Egypt. Cleopatra was a woman who understood the power of narratives. She crafted her story as skillfully as she governed her kingdom, leaving behind a legacy that was as much about perception as it was about reality. Her ability to navigate the treacherous waters of ancient geopolitics, combined with her economic acumen and public relations genius, made her reign a period of prosperity and stability for Egypt. And while her romances with Rome's top dogs might steal the historical spotlight, it was Cleopatra's domestic policies and political savvy that truly defined her as one of history's most formidable rulers. As we continue to unravel Cleopatra's story, remember this: she was more than a queen in a crown, she was a leader who left an indelible mark on the world. Cleopatra wasn't just playing the Game of Thrones, she was rewriting the rules. So stay tuned as we delve deeper into her legacy and the monumental impact she had on both Egypt and the world stage. The story of Cleopatra is far from over, and there's much more to explore in the chapters ahead. As we sail into the saga of Cleopatra's last stand, let's set the stage for one of history's most iconic showdowns, the Battle of Actium. This wasn't just another ancient skirmish, it was the Super Bowl of the Mediterranean, complete with political intrigue, naval warfare, and enough drama to fill an entire season of a prestige TV series. Cleopatra and Mark Antony versus Octavian, Rome's future Augustus, was less about clashing swords and more about clashing egos, ambitions, and strategies. First, let's pop the bubble of romanticized tragedy that often surrounds this tale. The idea that Cleopatra and Antony were merely star-crossed lovers caught in the crossfire of destiny is a narrative that might tug at the heartstrings, but it skips over their razor-sharp political calculus. Antony, ever the ambitious Roman general, needed Cleopatra's resources like a caffeine addict needs their morning cup. Her treasury was his war chest, her fleet, his navy. By 31 BCE, tensions were higher than a kite at a Roman festival, with Octavian and Antony squaring off for control of the empire. Octavian, who had the political savvy of a chess grandmaster, played the propaganda game like a fiddle. He painted Antony as the traitor. Rome's prodigal son led astray by Cleopatra, the exotic, bewitching queen. It was a narrative that resonated with the Roman public, who were more than ready to buy into the scandalous tale of Antony's so-called Eastern decadence and betrayal. Now, onto the military chessboard. Antony and Cleopatra amassed their forces at Actium, a promontory on the western coast of Greece, a strategic location with a view that could kill. Their force wasn't just large, it was colossal, with around 500 ships and 100,000 soldiers. But, as anyone who's ever tried to organize a family vacation knows, size isn't everything. Logistics, supply lines, and morale were the unsung heroes or villains of the day. Octavian's fleet, commanded by Agrippa, his trusted admiral, was leaner, meaner, and more maneuverable. The Roman ships were designed for ramming and boarding, a strategy that played to their strengths. Antony's fleet, on the other hand, was more akin to massive floating fortresses, heavily armed but cumbersome. It was like pitting a fleet of speedboats against a convoy of battleships. As the battle unfolded on September 2nd, 331 BCE, things went south faster than a snowbird in January. The wind, quite literally, was not in Antony and Cleopatra's favour. Without a favourable breeze, their larger ships were sitting ducks, and Agrippa's agile fleet took full advantage, circling like a pack of wolves around a wounded animal. Cleopatra, ever the tactician, realised that hanging around was a losing proposition. With her trademark decisiveness, she made a break for it, leading a retreat with her fleet and leaving Antony to face the music. This wasn't a cowardly escape, but a calculated move. Cleopatra's primary objective was always Egypt's survival. She knew that losing the fleet would mean losing Egypt's independence. Antony, torn between his loyalty to Cleopatra and his Roman troops, followed her, a decision that sealed their fate in the annals of history. Financially, the cost of this military debacle was staggering. Antony and Cleopatra's war effort drained Egypt's treasury, a hit that would have lasting repercussions. War isn't cheap, and the failed campaign at Actium was a fiscal fiasco, leaving the kingdom economically weakened and politically vulnerable. So, why did things unravel like a poorly knitted sweater? For one, the coalition between Antony and Cleopatra was built on the shaky foundations of mutual necessity rather than shared vision. Antony's Roman troops were never fully committed to his alliance with Cleopatra, viewing her as an interloper in their imperial ambitions. Moreover, Octavian's propaganda machine had done its work, eroding Antony's support back home and casting a long shadow over their endeavour. In the end, the Battle of Actium was less a grand romantic tragedy and more a cautionary tale about the perils of overreaching ambition and the harsh realities of war. Cleopatra's calculated risks didn't pay off, and the fallout was as swift as it was brutal. Her dream of an Eastern Empire ruled from Alexandria crumbled, and the sands of time buried the ambitions of a queen who dared to dream big. Yet, her story doesn't end here. Not by a long shot. With the defeat at Actium, Cleopatra faced her greatest challenge yet, the survival of Egypt in the face of Roman conquest. As the dust settled and Octavian's forces closed in, Cleopatra would once again need to call upon every ounce of her political acumen, charisma, and cunning to navigate the perilous waters ahead. Stay tuned, because the final act of Cleopatra's saga is just around the corner, and it's a tale of intrigue, survival, and the indomitable spirit of a woman whose name continues to echo through history. Cleopatra may have lost the battle, but her legacy was far from defeated. The Queen of the Nile had one more card to play, and the world would be watching. So, as Cleopatra stood on the brink of history's abyss, she wasn't just a queen facing a conqueror, she was a woman confronting the collapse of her world. Octavian was closing in, not just with legions, but with a narrative that would reshape Cleopatra's legacy for centuries. The aftermath of her defeat at Actium was less about a tragic love story and more about the inexorable tide of Roman imperialism washing over the ancient world. When Cleopatra finally took her own life, whether by snakebite, poison, or some other means shrouded in mystery, she ensured that Egypt would fall into Roman hands without the spectacle of a queen paraded through the streets of Rome as a trophy. Octavian, ever the shrewd politician, capitalized on her death to consolidate his power, marking the end of the Hellenistic age and the dawn of the Roman Empire. Egypt was annexed as a Roman province in 30 BCE, becoming the empire's grain supply depot, fueling the insatiable appetites of Rome's ever-growing population. This shift was not just a geopolitical footnote, it was a seismic cultural transformation as well. In the wake of her death, Cleopatra's legacy was left in the hands of her conquerors. Octavian, soon-to-be Augustus, Rome's first emperor, carefully curated her image. To justify his conquest and solidify his rule, he painted Cleopatra as the ultimate foreign temptress, the femme fatale who ensnared Rome's finest and brought them to ruin. This narrative was not just convenient, it was essential for Octavian's propaganda machine. Cleopatra became the archetype of the dangerous woman, a narrative that Roman poets and historians lapped up like cats at a milk bowl. But let's peel back the layers of this myth. Cleopatra wasn't just some seductive siren who played men like fiddles. She was a canny ruler who understood the power dynamics of her time better than most. She spoke to her people in their own language, literally and figuratively, in ways her Ptolemaic predecessors never did. Her reign was marked by economic prosperity and strategic alliances, While historians like Plutarch and Cassius Dio love to sensationalize her personal life, Cleopatra's true genius lay in her ability to navigate the treacherous waters of power and politics. She was playing a high-stakes game with Rome, and she played it with unmatched dexterity until the very end. Fast forward a few centuries, and Cleopatra's story had been moulded into a cautionary tale, a tragic romance, and a symbol of exotic allure, a tapestry woven with threads of truth and fiction. Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra immortalized her in the Western imagination as an emblem of love and ambition, a narrative that has persisted through countless adaptations and retellings. Hollywood, with its penchant for grandeur and drama, further cemented Cleopatra's image as the quintessential queen of allure, with Elizabeth Taylor's portrayal in the 1963 epic film forever capturing her as a symbol of opulent romance. Yet, beyond the silver screen and the stage, Cleopatra's true legacy is far richer and more complex. She was a ruler who resisted Roman domination until the end, a monarch who leveraged her intelligence and resources in a valiant, albeit ultimately unsuccessful, attempt to preserve her kingdom's sovereignty. Her policies on trade and taxation were advanced for her time, ensuring Egypt's economic stability even as the world around her shifted like sand dunes in a desert storm. So, what lessons can modern leaders glean from Cleopatra's story? For starters, she exemplifies the power of strategic alliances and the importance of understanding the cultural and political landscape. Cleopatra knew that her survival depended on aligning Egypt with the right power brokers, and she did so with a finesse that was both admirable and necessary. Her ability to communicate with her subjects in their native tongue underscores the timeless importance of connecting with one's constituency, an evergreen lesson for any leader seeking to inspire loyalty and trust. Moreover, Cleopatra's life serves as a stark reminder of the perils of propaganda. Her portrayal by Roman historians has shaped her legacy as much as her actions did. It's a cautionary tale about the narratives that outlast reality, highlighting how history is often written by the victors, who may not always paint a fair or accurate picture. In the end, Cleopatra's story is not just about a queen who lost a kingdom, it's about a leader who left an indelible mark on history. Her name continues to resonate, not because of her relationships with powerful men, but because of her unyielding spirit and her unwavering resolve in the face of overwhelming odds. Cleopatra was a woman who refused to be defined by the narratives of others, crafting her own legacy with the skill of a master storyteller. As we close this chapter on Cleopatra, let's remember her not just as a figure of romance and intrigue, but as a formidable leader whose life was a testament to the enduring complexities of power, politics, and perception. Cleopatra may have departed this world over 2 millennia ago, but her legacy remains a vibrant testament to the art of leadership and the enduring power of narrative. In the bustling streets of Coyoacán, a neighborhood in the sprawling Mexico City, a tiny whirlwind named Frida Kahlo was born on July 6, 1907. Now, if you've heard the tales of this iconic artist, you might think her life began with a dramatic flourish, but it was really more of a low-key entry. Her parents, Wilhelm Guillermo Kahlo, a German photographer, and Matilda Calderón y González, a woman of mixed Spanish and indigenous heritage, probably didn't have a clue that their daughter would grow up to challenge the very fabric of art and identity. Frida had a knack for mischief right from the start. Picture a young girl who wasn't afraid to push boundaries, literally and figuratively. She once strapped fireworks to a toy wagon and sent it rattling through the backyard. You could say she was practicing for a life of explosive creativity. Her family, a mix of European and Mexican influences, was as colorful as her future paintings, providing her with a rich tapestry of cultural contradictions to draw from. But let's not get too misty-eyed about her idyllic childhood. Frida's early life was no walk in the park, or the Casa Azul for that matter. By the age of 6, she was struck by polio, a disease that turned her right leg into what she wryly called a little thinner than the other. While some might see this as a tragic setback, Frida took it in stride, quite literally. Her father encouraged her to stay active, and soon she was swimming, wrestling, and even boxing. Yes, boxing, because why settle for knitting when you can throw a punch? Fast forward to 1922, and Frida was one of only 35 girls out of 2,000 students at the prestigious National Preparatory School. Here, she developed not just a love for art but also a taste for rebellion. She joined a group called the Cachuchas, a gang of intellectual pranksters who made it their mission to challenge authority and infuse a little chaos into the academic order. They wore caps, hence the name, and engaged in stunts like staging mock trials of their teachers. Frida, of course, was in her element. But just when you think her life was a series of playful escapades, the universe hit pause on the fun in the most brutal way. Enter the infamous bus accident of September 17, 1925. We're talking about a day that would rival any melodrama. Frida, a mere 18 years old, was riding home with her boyfriend, Alejandro Gomez Arias, when a streetcar collided with their bus. It was a catastrophe of epic proportions, resulting in multiple fatalities and leaving Frida with injuries that sound like a medieval torture list, a broken spinal column, a shattered pelvis, and a metal handrail that pierced her abdomen. The romanticized version of this story often skips to the part where Frida miraculously survives and becomes an art genius overnight. Let's hit pause on that sweetened narrative and acknowledge the gritty truth. Her recovery was long, painful, and involved a series of surgeries that would leave anyone else cursing the heavens. Yet Frida, in her indomitable style, began painting while bedridden, using a specially made easel and a mirror attached to her canopy bed. Talk about making the best of a bad situation. It's easy to get caught up in the miracle survivor trope, but let's give credit where it's due. Frida's tenacity was not some divine gift, but a hard-won trait honed through years of defying expectations. Her art became a way to process the physical and emotional trauma, a canvas for her pain and passions. And while many would have wallowed in self-pity, Frida turned her adversity into an unstoppable drive. In the years that followed, Frida would become synonymous with resilience, creativity, and a rebellious spirit that refused to be tamed. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's remember the girl who once set off fireworks just to see what would happen. That same curiosity and audacity would propel her through a life marked by both tragedy and triumph, leaving a legacy as vibrant and enduring as her paintings. So, after transforming her adversity into art with the finesse of a magician pulling rabbits from hats, Frida Kahlo was ready to tackle the world, or at least the Mexican art scene. But let's debunk one persistent myth right off the bat. Frida didn't just waltz into the art world and become an instant sensation. Nope, the road to artistic fame is rarely paved in gold, and Frida's path was no different. While Frida was recovering from her injuries, she began to paint in earnest. Her early works were heavily influenced by her own suffering, portraying vivid, often brutal self-portraits that screamed both agony and defiance. But where did she get the skills, you ask? Well, she was largely self-taught. Sure, she had some art education at Escuela Nacional Preparatoria, but let's not kid ourselves. She wasn't attending art classes with Picasso and Van Gogh. She honed her craft through sheer willpower and an insatiable curiosity. While she was developing her unique style, Frida's work caught the eye of a certain Diego Rivera. Ah, Diego Rivera, Frida's husband and, let's be honest, a man who could fill an entire museum with his ego alone. Rivera was already an established muralist by the time Frida entered the scene. He was larger than life, both in the literal sense and in his reputation. Picture a man who could paint an entire wall in a day and then critique it as if he was discussing the weather. Frida and Diego's relationship was as tumultuous as a soap opera episode on Fast Forward. They married in 1929, and let's just say the world of art has never seen such a fiery duo. Their union was a cocktail of passion, talent, jealousy, and infidelity. Shaken, not stirred. Frida once described their marriage as the union between an elephant and a dove, and considering Diego's physical stature and Frida's delicate frame, she wasn't far off. But let's get back to the art. Rivera's influence on Frida was undeniable. He encouraged her to embrace Mexican folk art and indigenous culture, steering her away from European influences. This guidance was crucial in helping Frida develop her signature style, characterized by vibrant colors and symbolic imagery. Yet, while Rivera's mentorship was invaluable, it's important to remember that Frida was no puppet. Her work was deeply personal, a stark reflection of her own experiences and emotions. Despite the romanticized notion that Frida rose to fame overnight, her journey was more akin to a slow burn. It wasn't until the 1930s that her work began gaining serious attention. Her first solo exhibition was held in New York in 1938, and it wasn't until 1939 that the Louvre bought one of her paintings, making her the first Mexican artist to achieve this honor. Not exactly an overnight success story, huh? Now, let's talk about the economics of being an artist in the early 20th century. Spoiler alert, it was not a lucrative career. Frida and Diego lived in a modest, albeit colorful, house in San Angel, a neighborhood in Mexico City. The art world was not exactly clamoring to throw money at Frida's feet. Her paintings, while appreciated, didn't sell like hotcakes. She relied on commissions and the occasional sale, but it was Rivera's murals that paid the bills. Their marriage, much like their art, was a canvas of contrasts. They inspired each other, yet their relationship was peppered with infidelity and conflict. Frida and Diego had affairs with multiple partners, and their tumultuous love life became the stuff of legend. At one point, Frida had an affair with communist revolutionary Leon Trotsky, who was staying with them in Mexico. Talk about mixing politics with pleasure. Despite, or perhaps because of, their explosive relationship, Frida's work continued to evolve. Her paintings became more autobiographical, exploring themes of identity, post-colonialism, gender, class and race in Mexican society. She was not just an artist, but a storyteller, weaving her personal narrative into each brushstroke. As we wrap up this chapter of Frida's life, let's pause to appreciate the complexity of her journey. She was not just the wife of a famous muralist or a painter of pretty pictures. Frida Kahlo was a revolutionary artist who defied conventions and carved out her own space in the art world. Her story is one of grit, resilience, and an unyielding commitment to her craft. And as her life continued to unfold, so too did her art, each piece a testament to her indomitable spirit and her refusal to be defined by anyone but herself. And speaking of Frida Kahlo carving her own space, let's fast forward to 1938, a year that marked a pivotal moment in her career, her first solo exhibition in New York City. Now, if you think this was the start of her rags to riches story, hold your horses. The idea that artists simply unveil their work and suddenly swim in rivers of gold is more fairy tale than fact. For Frida, the exhibition at the Julien Levy Gallery wasn't just a showcase, it was a battleground where her personal pain and vibrant Mexican identity clashed with the surrealist wave sweeping through the art world. Let's dive into the numbers for some perspective. The gallery featured 25 paintings, and while you might imagine a bidding war akin to a Sotheby's auction, reality was less glamorous. The exhibition was a critical success, but a commercial, well, not quite success. She sold about half her paintings, with prices ranging from $200 to $400 each, peanuts compared to today's art market where her works fetch millions. But even back then, this wasn't exactly a windfall. In 1938, the average American's annual salary hovered around $500, so Frida's earnings from the exhibition were more of a band-aid than a bankroll. Frida's art was a cocktail of raw emotion and cultural pride, a heady mix that appealed to the surrealists but didn't fit neatly into their box. She was invited to Paris in 1939 by André Breton, the self-proclaimed Pope of Surrealism, who was enamored with Frida's work. Breton, with all his avant-garde flair, declared Frida a natural surrealist. But here's the kicker, Frida wasn't buying it. She famously quipped, "They thought I was a surrealist, but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." This was no dreamy escapism, it was a visceral translation of her life onto canvas. Breton may have had grand plans for Frida in Paris, but the City of Light was more of a flickering candle for her. The exhibition there was marred by poor organization and was hardly the triumph Frida was promised. Yet, despite the chaos, one of her paintings, The Frame, was purchased by the Louvre, making her the first Mexican artist to be displayed in what was arguably the world's most prestigious gallery. That's a milestone worth noting, even if the sale didn't pad her pockets with cash. Now, let's talk about the reality of being a female artist in a male-dominated space. The art world was a boys' club, and Frida was anything but a timid guest. She navigated this testosterone-laden terrain with a mix of grit and charisma, which was no small feat. While Diego Rivera's murals were celebrated as national treasures, Frida's intensely personal canvases were often sidelined. Yet, she refused to be the little wife in Rivera's shadow. Her work was her megaphone, broadcasting her defiance and unique perspective in a world that preferred women to stay silent. Frida's paintings were deeply autobiographical, exploring themes of identity, gender, and post-colonial Mexico. Works like The Two Fridas and Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird weren't just pretty pictures, they were visual diaries offering a window into her psyche. Her art was a tapestry of pain and pride, woven with threads of her indigenous heritage and personal suffering. This wasn't just art for art's sake, it was a statement, a rebellion against the conventions of both society and the art world. Financially, Frida's situation was far from rosy. Despite her growing reputation, she wasn't exactly rolling in pesos. The Kahlo Rivera household was kept afloat by Rivera's commissions, but Frida's earnings remained sporadic at best. The starving artist trope is romantic in retrospect, but the reality was Frida lived it, juggling medical bills, art supplies, and the everyday costs of living. Her financial struggles were a stark contrast to the vivid opulence of her paintings, a reminder that passion doesn't always pay the bills. Let's not forget the era's economic backdrop. The Great Depression had left its mark, and while the 1930s saw some recovery, the world was still reeling from financial instability. For artists, this meant fewer patrons and tighter purse strings. Frida's ability to make a name for herself during this time was a testament to her talent and tenacity, not the generosity of art collectors. Frida's journey was anything but a linear ascent to fame. It was a roller coaster of triumphs and setbacks, fueled by an unyielding spirit and a refusal to conform. Her art was a mirror, reflecting a world that was both beautiful and brutal, a blend of the mythical and the mundane. As we pause here, it's clear that Frida Kahlo was not just an artist, she was a force of nature, defying the odds with every brushstroke. Her story, like her paintings, was a masterpiece of contradictions, a vivid reminder that true art is born from the soul's deepest depths. And as her journey continued, so too did her legacy, leaving an indelible mark on both the canvas and the world. Frida Kahlo wasn't just a painter, she was a political firebrand wrapped in vibrant shawls and defiant stares. Her involvement with the Communist Party wasn't a mere flirtation with ideology. It was a full-blown love affair with political rebellion. In the 1930s, while the rest of the world was busy figuring out how to survive the Great Depression, Frida was busy attending communist meetings and waving the red flag high, quite literally. She officially joined the Mexican Communist Party in 1928, which was no small feat in a country still reeling from revolutionary aftershocks. Now, let's talk about the political landscape of Frida's Mexico. The Mexican Revolution, which kicked off in 1910, was a seismic event that shook the socio-political foundations of the country. By the time Frida came of age, Mexico was a hotbed of revolutionary ideas, with the Communist Party playing a key role. For Frida, communism wasn't just about economics. It was about justice, equality, and sticking it to the man. But let's not kid ourselves into thinking she was a political strategist. Frida's approach to politics was as visceral and personal as her art, driven by emotion rather than cold, calculated theory. And then there's Leon Trotsky, the exiled Russian revolutionary who found a temporary haven in Mexico from 1937 to 1939. Picture this: Frida and Diego Rivera offering sanctuary to Trotsky and his wife, Natalia Sedova, in their home, Casa Azul. The house was a political and artistic salon where intellectuals mingled, debated, and occasionally had affairs. Enter the infamous Trotsky-Kahlo dalliance. Yes, the rumors are true. Frida and Trotsky had a brief affair, adding another layer of intrigue to her already complex narrative. It was a scandalous liaison that history buffs love to dissect, but let's not oversell its impact. In the grand scheme of things, it was less about political maneuvering and more about a meeting of rebellious spirits. Frida's political engagement is often romanticized, but was she really a revolutionary force to be reckoned with? Well, yes and no. She was certainly vocal, using her art as a megaphone for her beliefs. Paintings like Marxism Will Give Health to the Sick and The Broken Column are steeped in political symbolism, serving as both self-portrait and social commentary. But did she change the course of history? Not exactly. While her art immortalized her ideals, her direct influence on political events was minimal. Her power lay in the ability to provoke thought and challenge norms, not in drafting manifestos or leading marches. Let's pause to consider the economic realities of being a politically charged artist in the early 20th century. The art world was no socialist utopia. If anything, it was a capitalist playground where collectors held the power. Frida's political leanings didn't exactly endear her to wealthy patrons, and while her art was celebrated for its raw emotion, it wasn't always a commercial success. She had a knack for attracting attention, but translating that into financial stability was another matter entirely. Her life wasn't a revolutionary's dream of communal wealth. It was more of a tightrope walk between artistic passion and economic necessity. Despite the myth of the starving artist, Frida's political convictions were as unwavering as her commitment to her craft. She attended rallies, painted banners, and even hosted Communist Party meetings in her home. Her political life was as colourful and tumultuous as her paintings, filled with contradictions and complexities. She was a woman who wore her heart on her sleeve, a sleeve that was often red. Frida's political story serves as a reminder that revolutions aren't built on grand gestures alone. They're sustained by individuals who dare to question the status quo, even if their impact isn't immediately felt. Her legacy as a political artist endures not because she changed the world, but because she dared to imagine a different one. As we continue to explore Frida's life, let's not forget that her art wasn't just about personal pain. It was about collective struggle, a testament to the power of the individual voice in a world that often demands conformity. In the end, Frida Kahlo was an artist of contradictions, a woman who defied easy categorization. Her politics, like her art, were deeply personal, woven with threads of identity, defiance, and a relentless pursuit of truth. She wasn't just a painter or a communist, she was a revolutionary in her own right, challenging the boundaries of both art and politics with every brushstroke. As we move forward in her story, remember, Frida's canvas was her battlefield, and her paintbrush, her weapon, a vivid reminder that the personal is indeed political. So, let's carry on with the tale of Frida Kahlo, a woman whose life was as vibrant as the colours she loved to splash across her canvases. Her posthumous journey to superstardom is as fascinating as her life, if not more so. After her death in 1954, Frida's art and persona took a bit of a hiatus from the spotlight. But, like any good plot twist, her legacy was about to stage a dramatic comeback. Let's fast forward to 1958, just 4 years after she passed, when La Casa Azul, Frida's unforgettable cobalt blue home, was transformed into a museum. Picture this: Frida's old stomping grounds, now a shrine for art lovers and curious tourists alike. It's like her life was one long museum exhibit, and now her actual home was turning into one. The museum opened its doors to the public, and it was as if Frida herself had invited everyone for tea, complete with surrealist sugar cubes and a dash of revolutionary fervour. Now, La Casa Azul isn't just any house, it's a vivid tapestry of Frida's life and work. The walls echo with her spirit, a blend of pain and passion that she so expertly captured in her art. Visitors can wander through rooms filled with her personal items, paintings, and even her collection of pre-Columbian artifacts. It's a treasure trove of Frida-ness, a place where you can almost hear her laughter and feel her defiant spirit. But let's not romanticize it too much. The conversion of her home into a museum was also a savvy move to keep her legacy alive, and the cash registers ringing. Speaking of cash registers, let's talk about the commodification of Frida Kahlo. In death she became an industry, a brand even. Her image is emblazoned on everything from coffee mugs to socks, a curious fate for someone who spent her life challenging consumerist norms. How would Frida herself react to this? Would she chuckle at the irony or roll her eyes at the absurdity? It's anyone's guess, but you can bet she'd have a few choice words about it. After all, this is the woman who once said, "I am not sick, I am broken, but I am happy to be alive as long as I can paint." Not exactly the type to go quietly into the realm of mass-produced merchandise. But let's be honest, Frida's image sells because it resonates. Her story of resilience and rebellion speaks to the underdog in all of us. And while her image may be plastered on tote bags worldwide, it's her art that continues to captivate. Her paintings, once sidelined as the eccentric musings of Diego Rivera's wife, now command millions at auctions. In July 2020, her painting Diego Yo-Yo sold for a staggering $34.9 million at Sotheby's, setting a record for the most expensive Latin American artwork ever sold at auction. Frida would probably have a field day with that little factoid. It's worth noting that Frida's rise to fame wasn't an overnight phenomenon. It was more of a slow build, a crescendo that took decades to reach its peak. Her art began to gain international recognition in the late 20th century, coinciding with the feminist movement's embrace of her as an icon. Frida, with her unapologetic exploration of identity and gender, became a symbol of empowerment. Her story was one of defiance, a narrative that transcends time and continues to inspire new generations. So why does Frida Kahlo's legacy endure? For one, she was a master of self-invention long before social media made it the norm. Her art was intensely personal, yet universally relatable. She laid bare her soul on canvas, inviting viewers into her world of pain, passion, and politics. Frida's life was a living canvas, a testament to the power of art to transcend personal suffering and speak to collective human experiences. And let's not forget the socio-political context that helped propel her into the stratosphere of art history. The late 20th century saw a renewed interest in Latin American art, spurred by a growing awareness of post-colonial narratives. Frida's work, with its rich symbolism and cultural pride, fit perfectly into this narrative. Her art was not just pretty pictures, it was a visual manifesto, challenging Western dominance and celebrating Mexican identity. As we wrap up this whirlwind tour of Frida's life and legacy, let's reflect on what her story tells us about the nature of art and fame. Frida Kahlo was more than just an artist. She was a force of nature, a woman who painted her truth with unflinching honesty. Her life was a tapestry of contradictions, much like the world she inhabited. She was both fragile and fierce, a symbol of suffering and strength. Her art continues to inspire because it captures the essence of what it means to be human, flawed, passionate, and eternally searching for meaning. In the end, Frida's legacy is a reminder that art is not just a reflection of the world, but a powerful tool for change. Her paintings continue to echo through the halls of La Casa Azul and far beyond, inviting us to challenge norms and embrace our true selves. So, if you ever find yourself in Mexico City, make a pilgrimage to her indigo sanctuary. Walk through the rooms where she once lived and breathed, and let her spirit guide you through a journey of self-discovery. Frida Kahlo's story is one of triumph over adversity, a testament to the enduring power of art to transcend time and space. Her legacy is more than the sum of her paintings, or the colourful merchandise that bears her likeness. It's a beacon of hope, a call to embrace our individuality and fight for the world we want to see. As long as there are people willing to challenge the status quo and paint their own reality, Frida's spirit will live on, beyond the canvas and into the hearts of dreamers and rebels alike. When you think of ancient empires, the Hittites might not be the first name that leaps to mind, but that's precisely why they deserve a spot in our historical Hall of Fame. Nestled in the heart of what's now central Turkey, these folks were the original underdogs of the ancient world, pulling themselves up by their metaphorical sandal straps in a time when survival was more about spears than shares. From roughly 1600 to 1178 BCE, the Hittites turned a swath of Anatolia into a powerhouse, strategically parked between Europe and the Middle East. Talk about location, location, location. Now, let's set the scene. The Hittite Empire wasn't just about sprawling lands and grandiose titles. It was about making do with what you've got, and then some. Imagine living in a region that's part rugged plateau, part fertile valleys, and having to fend off not just the elements but also a who's who of ancient heavyweights like the Egyptians, Assyrians, and Babylonians. The Hittites were like the scrappy startup challenging the established conglomerates, and they did it with a flair for strategy that would make any modern-day tactician nod in approval. One of their secret weapons? Chariots. And not just any chariots. These were the ancient equivalent of sports cars, sleek, nimble, and built for speed. While other armies lumbered along, the Hittites mastered the art of chariot warfare, earning a reputation as skilled charioteers. Their chariots were lighter and carried 3 warriors instead of the usual 2, allowing them to outmaneuver opponents and pack a punch. In a world where battles were often decided by who showed up with the most intimidating wheels, the Hittites were ahead of the curve, literally. But let's not romanticize things too much. Sure, the chariotry sounds glamorous, but it was born out of necessity. The Hittites weren't blessed with the vast agricultural lands of Egypt or the bountiful rivers of Mesopotamia. Instead, they had to innovate to turn their modest resources into something formidable. And so, necessity became the mother of their military inventions. They weren't just warriors, they were strategists, making the most out of rocky terrain and limited manpower. Their strategic location was both a blessing and a curse. Sitting at the crossroads of continents, they had access to trade routes that brought in goods, ideas, and sometimes trouble. It's like living above a bustling cafe, great for morning coffee, not so great when you're trying to get some peace and quiet. The Hittites used their position wisely, though, playing off neighbouring powers against each other when it suited their needs. They were the ultimate middlemen of the ancient world, and they knew how to turn that to their advantage. The Hittites' rise wasn't just about brute strength or cunning alone. It was a complex mix of geography, innovation, and good old-fashioned grit. They built their empire from a patchwork of city-states, each with its own quirks and ambitions, and united them under a single banner. It wasn't always smooth sailing, of course. Internal squabbles and external threats were as common as a heatwave in the Anatolian summer. But the Hittites had a knack for weathering storms, both literal and metaphorical. Of course, with all this talk of underdogs and chariots, it's easy to get swept up in the romance of it all. But let's not forget the harsh realities. The Hittite world was one of constant conflict, where peace treaties were written in stone because nobody trusted papyrus. Their empire was forged in the fires of war, and it was a brutal business. Yet, for all the bloodshed, the Hittites were also remarkable for their diplomacy. They understood that sometimes talking could achieve what swords could not. The famous Treaty of Kadesh with Egypt, one of the first recorded peace treaties, was a testament to their political savvy. In the end, the Hittites were a testament to the idea that you don't need to be the biggest to be the best. Their legacy is one of resilience, innovation, and strategic brilliance. They may not have the same household name status as some of their contemporaries, but in the grand tapestry of history, they hold a thread that's all their own. So next time you hear the rumble of wheels on cobblestones, think of the Hittites, ancient trailblazers who knew a thing or two about turning the odds in their favour. So, next time you hear the rumble of wheels on cobblestones, think of the Hittites, ancient trailblazers who knew a thing or two about turning the odds in their favour. Now, let's roll those wheels right into the nitty-gritty of Hittite military strategy. Spoiler alert, it wasn't just about having the fastest chariot on the block. The Hittites were like the Steve Jobs of ancient warfare. They took existing concepts and turned them into something revolutionary. Their chariot design was the envy of the ancient world, with a little extra Hittite magic sprinkled in. Picture this. You're an ancient soldier, and you're told to cram into a typical two-man chariot tight fit, right? Well, the Hittites said, why not add a third person and make it a party? This wasn't just about showing off their engineering prowess, it was a strategic move. The third man was usually a shield-bearer, adding a layer of protection against enemy arrows and spears. It was like having your personal bodyguard, only with less suit and tie, more bronze and leather. The innovation didn't stop at the chariot. The Hittites were also masters of the terrain, using their knowledge of the Anatolian landscape to outsmart their enemies. They had a knack for surprise attacks, ambushing foes from the hills and valleys they knew like the back of their hands. They were the original masters of home field advantage, making the most of every nook and cranny in their rugged homeland. It turns out that being familiar with every rock and tree can be a game-changer when you're trying to outmaneuver a larger force. Now, let's talk about the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BCE. A clash that was less about who could throw the biggest punch and more about who could dodge better. This was ancient warfare's version of the Super Bowl, with Ramses II and his Egyptian forces squaring off against the Hittite king Mu'tali II and his chariot-riding elite. Ramses had the numbers, but the Hittites had the tactics. They managed to launch a surprise attack on the Egyptian camp, catching Ramses with his royal sandals down. But here's the kicker. The Hittites almost won, but a bit of miscommunication, a universal military blunder, led to their retreat. The battle ended in a stalemate, with neither side able to claim a definitive victory. However, Ramses went home and carved some epic propaganda on temple walls, claiming he'd single-handedly saved Egypt. It's like the ancient world's version of a political spin. Never let the facts get in the way of a good story. This battle wasn't just about chariots and spears, though. it was also a textbook example of espionage and psychological warfare. Before the battle, the Hittites sent spies to gather intel on the Egyptian positions. These spies were so convincing that they managed to feed Ramses false information about the Hittite army's whereabouts. The Egyptians thought they were about to face a small force, only to be confronted by the full might of the Hittite chariot corps. Talk about a plot twist. In the grand scheme of ancient warfare, the Hittites were the chess players, thinking several moves ahead, while others were still figuring out the rules of checkers. Sure, luck played its part, as it always does in war, but it was their strategic foresight that often gave them the upper hand. They didn't just rely on brute force, they used cunning and guile, turning every disadvantage into an opportunity. They were the ancient world's equivalent of a scrappy startup taking on tech giants. Economically, this wasn't just about who could smash the most heads, it was also about resources. The Hittites used their strategic location to secure vital trade routes, ensuring a steady supply of tin and copper for their bronze weapons. Their economy wasn't as grand as Egypt's, but they made every coin count, funneling resources into their military machine with ruthless efficiency. It was a classic case of quality over quantity, a lesson lost on many a would-be conqueror. And let's not forget about the role of diplomacy. While they were more than capable of holding their own on the battlefield, the Hittites also knew when to put down the sword and pick up the pen. The Treaty of Kadesh, one of the earliest known peace treaties, was a diplomatic masterpiece, cementing a peace that would last for decades. It was a savvy move that allowed both empires to focus on internal stability and economic growth. The pen might be mightier than the sword, but the Hittites knew how to wield both. So, as we delve deeper into the annals of Hittite history, remember this: they were more than just a footnote in ancient texts. They were innovators, diplomats, and strategists, shaping the course of history one chariot ride at a time. There's much more to uncover in this saga, but for now, let's leave the Hittites at the height of their power, a testament to the idea that brains and bravery can sometimes outmatch sheer brawn. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the complex tapestry of this fascinating empire. But hold your chariots, folks, because the Hittite story isn't all about high-speed warfare and diplomatic penmanship. Behind those impressive military maneuvers was an economic engine that kept the wheels greased and the swords sharp. Imagine trying to run an empire in a world where your nearest bank is a grain silo and your stock market is the local bazaar. The Hittites knew that power wasn't just about how many soldiers you could muster, it was about how well you could manage your resources. Let's dive into the nitty-gritty of Hittite economics, where resource management was as crucial as any battlefield strategy. The Hittites were masters of squeezing every last drop of potential from their rugged homeland. They didn't have the luxury of the Nile's bountiful floodplains, or the Tigris and Euphrates' fertile crescents. Instead, they relied on a clever mix of agriculture, animal husbandry, and trade to keep their coffers full. It was like running a lemonade stand in the desert. You had to make every lemon count. Their economy was built on the backbone of two critical resources, tin and copper. These metals were the bread and butter of bronze production, the ancient equivalent of today's steel. Without bronze, there'd be no weapons, no tools, no empire. The Hittites controlled key trade routes that funneled these metals from as far as the British Isles and the shores of the Black Sea. Picture a Hittite trader, expertly navigating treacherous paths, haggling like a pro to get the best deal on a shipment of tin. Yet, the Hittites had an ace up their sleeve that would turn the tables on their rivals: iron. While the rest of the ancient world was still enamored with bronze, the Hittites were quietly mastering the art of iron smelting. By the 14th century BCE, they had developed the technology to produce iron weapons on a scale that left their adversaries gawking. It was like showing up to a sword fight with a laser blaster. The ability to wield iron gave the Hittites a formidable edge, both literally and figuratively, in their military endeavors. But let's not get carried away with visions of shimmering iron blades. The process of smelting iron was labor-intensive and required significant resources. This is where the less glamorous side of the Hittite economy rears its head. The empire relied heavily on forced labor to keep the wheels of industry turning. Captives from conquered lands were often put to work in the mines and workshops, their days spent in the back-breaking toil required to produce the metal that would fuel Hittite conquests. It was a harsh reality. one that underscores the brutal nature of ancient empires, where power often came at the expense of human suffering. And then there was the tribute system, an ingenious, if ruthless, economic strategy. The Hittites were adept at extracting wealth from their vassal states, demanding regular tributes in the form of grain, livestock, and precious metals. These payments not only bolstered the Hittite economy, but also served as a reminder of their dominance. It's like the ancient version of a subscription service, only instead of streaming movies, you got to keep your head on your shoulders. This system of forced labor and tribute was the unsung backbone of Hittite military might. It allowed them to maintain a standing army that could be mobilized at a moment's notice. The Hittites understood that a well-fed, well-equipped soldier was worth his weight in gold or iron, as the case may be. Their strategic use of resources and manpower was a testament to their understanding of the economic foundations of power, an insight that many of their contemporaries failed to grasp. In the grand chessboard of ancient geopolitics, the Hittites were playing three-dimensional chess while others were still figuring out checkers. Their command of resources allowed them to punch above their weight, turning the tides of battles and forging an empire that could stand toe-to-toe with the mightiest of rivals. It wasn't just about having the strongest army, it was about having the smartest strategy, both on and off the battlefield. But lest we romanticize this too much, let's remember that the Hittites' economic prowess was built on a foundation of exploitation and control. The very systems that fueled their war machine were also their Achilles' heel, creating a reliance on subjugated peoples and resources that could be as fragile as a peace treaty on papyrus. The reality of empire is often a messy, contradictory affair, where the lines between conqueror and tyrant blur in the harsh light of history. So, as we continue our journey through the annals of Hittite history, let's keep in mind the complex interplay of economics and warfare. The Hittites were more than just warriors. They were economic strategists who understood that the true battle for supremacy was fought not just with swords, but with resources. Stay tuned as we unravel more of this fascinating tapestry, where every thread tells a story of innovation, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of power. Now, as we roll deeper into the saga of the Hittites, let's shift our gaze from the clang of swords and the clatter of chariots to the polished halls of Hattusa, where the real games of power played out. You see, the Hittite Empire wasn't just about iron and warfare. It was also a masterclass in political intrigue, where the king's throne was as much a battlefield as any dusty plain. The Hittite king wasn't just a figurehead decked out in gold and glory. Oh no, he was a multitasking maestro, juggling the roles of warrior, diplomat, and sometimes crisis manager with the flair of a circus performer. The king was expected to lead troops into battle, broker peace treaties, and keep an eagle eye on the court's political shenanigans. They were basically the CEOs of the ancient world, with a job description that would make any modern executive break into a cold sweat. Take Suppiluliuma I, for instance, whose reign from around 1344 to 1322 BCE reads like a manual on how to run an empire. Suppiluliuma wasn't content with just sitting pretty on his throne. He expanded Hittite influence through a mix of military campaigns and shrewd alliances, turning the Hittites into a force to be reckoned with. His diplomatic savvy was legendary. Think of him as the Henry Kissinger of the ancient world, but with more chariots. But let's not get too misty-eyed over these royal powerhouses. The Hittite court was a political minefield, where betrayal and backstabbing were as common as bread and beer. The king had to navigate a complex web of nobles, priests, and family members, any of whom might harbour ambitions for the throne. It was like playing a never-ending game of chess, where every move could be your last. If you thought modern politics was cutthroat, ancient Hattusa would have given Machiavelli a run for his money. And then there was the small matter of succession. Unlike the neat and tidy line of succession we see in some monarchies, Hittite inheritance was a bit like a game of musical thrones. The king's sons would often jockey for position, leading to power struggles that could destabilize the entire empire. The stakes were high, and losing could mean exile, imprisonment, or worse. It's no wonder the Hittites placed such emphasis on oaths of loyalty. Breaking one was considered a cardinal sin, punishable by the harshest means. Enter the Hittites' diplomatic prowess, exemplified by their famous Treaty of Kadesh with Egypt. This wasn't just a piece of parchment with a few signatures. No, it was the ancient version of a nuclear arms treaty, complete with mutual non-aggression clauses and prisoner exchanges. The treaty, signed around 1259 BCE between Hittite King Hattusili III and Egyptian Pharaoh Ramses II, is often hailed as the first known peace treaty in history. It was a masterstroke of diplomacy, allowing both empires to stop glaring at each other over their borders and focus on more pressing internal matters. The treaty wasn't just about keeping the peace, it was also a savvy piece of public relations. The Hittites knew that projecting an image of stability and strength was as important as wielding a sharp sword. By officially ending hostilities with Egypt, they could reallocate resources to bolster their internal administration and infrastructure. It was a reminder that sometimes the pen really was mightier than the sword, at least when it came to keeping an empire running smoothly. However, the Hittites' diplomatic finesse wasn't limited to their dealings with Egypt. They maintained a delicate balancing act with other regional powers, like the Assyrians and Babylonians, using marriage alliances and treaties to keep potential adversaries at bay. It was a bit like playing a game of Risk, where every alliance was calculated and every move was designed to maximize their advantage. Yet even the most skillful diplomacy couldn't always prevent internal strife. The Hittite kings had to be constantly vigilant against internal dissent, especially from powerful nobles who might see an opportunity to usurp the throne. The king's authority was often reinforced through religious rituals, where the monarch was portrayed as the chosen representative of the gods on earth. It was a clever way to bolster their legitimacy and keep the ambitious nobles in line, after all, who would dare challenge someone with divine backing. But let's not forget the role of the queen, or Tawanana, who wielded significant influence in the royal court. The position wasn't just ceremonial. The queen often played a crucial part in state affairs, sometimes acting as a regent or leading religious ceremonies. She was the power behind the throne, a formidable figure who could sway decisions and shape policy. It was a reminder that in the Hittite court, power wasn't just a man's game. Of course, running an empire wasn't just about palace intrigue and high-stakes diplomacy. The Hittites also had to maintain a delicate balance with their vassal states, which were scattered across Anatolia and beyond. These semi-independent regions were required to pay tribute to the Hittite king, but keeping them in line was no small feat. It was a bit like herding cats. Each vassal had its own agenda, and the king had to ensure their loyalty, often through a mix of coercion and concession. In the grand narrative of history, the Hittites were like the ultimate tightrope walkers, balancing on the thin line between chaos and control. Their ability to keep a fractious empire together was a testament to their political acumen and adaptability. They understood that power was as much about perception as it was about force, and they played the game with a finesse that would make any modern diplomat nod in admiration. But as with all great empires, the seeds of their downfall were sown within. The very structures that supported their military might, complex political alliances, control over vassal states, and a reliance on tribute, were also potential sources of weakness. The constant pressure to maintain these systems could strain resources and lead to internal divisions, setting the stage for the challenges that would ultimately test the resilience of the Hittite Empire. So as we continue our exploration of the Hittite story, let's remember that their legacy is not just one of conquest and chariots, but of cunning political maneuvering and strategic foresight. They were a testament to the idea that true power lies in the ability to adapt and innovate, to wield both the sword and the pen with equal skill. The Hittites may have walked the tightrope of empire, but they did so with a flair that ensured their place in the annals of history. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into this captivating tale, where the line between heroism and hubris grows ever thinner. The Hittite Empire's balancing act was impressive, but even the most skilled tightrope walker eventually stumbles. By the 13th century BCE, the Hittites were feeling the strain of managing a sprawling empire that was as unwieldy as a herd of cats on a leash. Overextension was a problem, as ancient as the hills they once defended so fiercely, with the empire stretching from the Aegean coast to the Euphrates River. It's like trying to run a marathon with a sprained ankle. You're bound to trip eventually. Before we dive into the unraveling, let's talk about the economy. The Hittite economy was akin to a finely tuned instrument, but even the best instruments can go out of tune. The reliance on forced labor and tribute from vassal states was their bread and butter, but it was also a ticking time bomb. The constant need for resources to fuel their military machine meant that if one cog in the economic wheel faltered, the whole system could grind to a halt. It's the ancient equivalent of relying on the thinnest thread to hold a heavy tapestry. One good tug, and it all comes down. Then there was the issue of external pressures. The Hittites weren't the only players in the ancient sandbox, and their neighbours were more than happy to kick sand in their faces when the opportunity arose. The Egyptians, Assyrians, and the mysterious sea peoples were like the neighbourhood kids who always wanted to borrow your toys but never returned them. By the late 13th century BCE, the Hittites found themselves caught in a geopolitical pincer movement. The Assyrians were pressing from the east, while the Sea Peoples, a confederation of marauders with a penchant for coastal raids, wreaked havoc from the west. It was like being stuck between a rock and a hard place, only with more swords and fewer friendly neighbours. Internally, things weren't any rosier. The succession disputes that plagued the Hittite court were like a family reunion where everyone wants to be the favourite child. The death of a king often led to power struggles that could destabilise the empire faster than you can say dynastic drama. And let's not forget the impact of climate change. Yes, even back then. A series of droughts strained agricultural production, leading to food shortages that only added fuel to the fire. When your subjects are hungry, they're less likely to care about grand military campaigns and more likely to start grumbling about the price of barley. As the 12th century BCE dawned, it was clear that the Hittites were fighting a losing battle against time and circumstance. The once mighty empire, held together by the sheer willpower and clever manoeuvring of its rulers, began to crumble. The capital city of Hattusa, once a bustling centre of power and culture, was abandoned around 1200 BCE. It's as if the lights went out on a grand stage, leaving nothing but echoes of past glories. But let's debunk a myth right here. The Hittites didn't just vanish into thin air like some kind of ancient magic trick. The narrative of a sudden disappearance is tempting, but it's more a case of gradual decline than an overnight vanishing act. The Hittites' influence lingered, and their cultural and technological innovations didn't just fade away. Instead, they were absorbed and adapted by the civilizations that followed. It's like passing the baton in a relay race. Just because the runner is out of sight doesn't mean the race is over. Their legacy, particularly in military strategy, left a lasting imprint. The use of iron weaponry, for instance, was a game-changer that future empires would build upon. The Hittites were among the first to harness the power of iron, and their techniques laid the groundwork for the Iron Age that followed. It's a bit like being the first to invent the wheel. Everyone else might perfect it, but you were the one who got the ball rolling. And let's not forget their diplomatic savvy. The Treaty of Kadesh, which we touched on earlier, set a precedent for future peace treaties. It wasn't just a ceasefire, it was a blueprint for diplomatic relations that would echo through the ages. The idea that two rival powers could sit down, hash out their differences, and come to an agreement was revolutionary at the time. It was a reminder that sometimes words can wield more power than weapons, a lesson that modern diplomats would do well to remember. So, as the curtain falls on the Hittite Empire, let's take a moment to appreciate their place in the grand tapestry of history. They were warriors and diplomats, innovators and strategists, leaving a legacy that would resonate long after their chariots stopped thundering across the plains. Their story is a testament to the idea that even in decline, there is influence, and even in defeat, there is legacy. The Hittites may not have the instant name recognition of their Egyptian or Babylonian contemporaries, but their impact is undeniable. They were the architects of their own destiny, for better or worse, and their story is a reminder that history is rarely a straight line. It's a winding road full of twists and turns, triumphs and tragedies. And as we look back on the Hittite Empire, we see not just the end of an era, but the beginning of new chapters in the epic saga of human civilization. So next time you think of the Hittites, remember the lessons they taught us, that power is fleeting, but influence endures, that innovation is the key to survival, and that even the mightiest of empires can fall, but their stories and legacies live on. The Hittites may have walked the tightrope of history, but their balance and grace ensured that they wouldn't be forgotten, even millennia later. And with that, we close the chapter on these ancient trailblazers, whose echoes still resonate in the annals of history. In the grand tapestry of medieval history, Eleanor of Aquitaine is the equivalent of a rich, vibrant thread that refuses to be overshadowed. Born in 1122, she was the eldest daughter of William X, the Duke of Aquitaine, a place so wealthy it might as well have been the medieval version of Silicon Valley. Imagine a region where wine flowed more abundantly than water, and troubadours serenaded even the pigeons in the square. That's Aquitaine for you, a land dripping in culture and cash, where Eleanor learned to play the political game with the finesse of a chess grandmaster, but on a board where the pieces often had more rust than shine. Eleanor's education was as rare as a unicorn sighting in those times. While most noble women were being trained to embroider and look decorative, Eleanor was diving into the deep end of politics, languages, and the arts. She could read, she could write, and she could engage in repartee sharp enough to shave the stubble off a knight's chin. Her father, likely realizing he had a prodigy rather than a mere daughter, ensured she was well versed in managing estates, understanding governance, and, most importantly, navigating the treacherous waters of medieval politics. At 15, Eleanor's life took a turn that would make any modern-day influencer jealous. She became the Duchess of Aquitaine, wielding more land and wealth than the King of France himself. And as if that wasn't enough, she soon became Queen of France by marrying Louis VII in 1137. Now, Louis was a man who, by all accounts, preferred monasteries over mansions and prayer over power, which made Eleanor's entrance into his life akin to introducing a live wire into a library. Eleanor's influence on Louis was as profound as it was inevitable. Picture a medieval couple where the Queen is urging the King to take up the sword and the cross for the Crusades, while he's still contemplating the best hymn to sing at Mass. Louis, under Eleanor's persuasive powers, decided to join the Second Crusade in 1147. Now, if you're picturing a grand adventure filled with chivalry, let me burst that bubble for you. The Crusades were more chaotic than a medieval fairground with free ale. Eleanor, however, took it upon herself to make the trip as bearable as a military expedition could be. She led a retinue that was reportedly the medieval equivalent of a rock star tour, complete with lavish tents and a retinue of ladies in waiting who likely had to dodge more arrows than proposals. But let's not romanticize too much here. Eleanor's involvement in the Crusades was a political chess move, not a grand romantic gesture. She was there to ensure Aquitaine's interests were protected, and she played her role with aplomb. Yet the crusade did more to expose the cracks in her marriage than it did to conquer lands. By the time they returned, Eleanor and Louis were less a couple, and more like two political opponents sharing a tent. By 1152, Eleanor had had enough of Louis's monastic tendencies and sought an annulment. Now, annulments in medieval times were as rare as a dragon sighting, but Eleanor was not one to be deterred. She cited consanguinity fancy medieval speak for "we're too closely related" as the reason. Given that most of European royalty at the time could trace their family trees back to a common ancestor without much squinting, this was less about bloodlines and more about Eleanor wanting a new chapter, preferably one with a bit more excitement. The annulment was granted, perhaps because Louis realized it was easier to part ways than to endure another crusade-inspired argument. Eleanor was now a free agent in the medieval power market. But here's the kicker. Within mere weeks of her annulment, she married Henry Plantagenet, the future Henry II of England. Talk about trading up. This marriage was less about love and more about power. Eleanor was bringing Aquitaine's vast wealth and her own political savvy into the Plantagenet fold. With Henry, Eleanor found a partner whose ambition matched her own. They would go on to rule an empire stretching from Scotland to the Pyrenees, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, Eleanor had successfully reshuffled the European chessboard with her swift and strategic moves, proving that in a world dominated by men, she was a queen in every sense of the word. Eleanor's early life and marriage to Louis VII set the stage for her legend, a blend of brains, beauty, and boldness that medieval chroniclers couldn't help but admire, even as they scratched their heads over her audacity. While many would write of her life as a romantic epic, the reality was more gritty and complex. She was a woman who understood the power plays of her time and wielded them with a deftness that left many a king wondering who was really in charge. Eleanor's marriage to Henry Plantagenet was like tossing two lit matches into a barrel of gunpowder, spectacularly explosive and impossible to ignore. With the ink barely dry on her annulment papers, Eleanor was now the Queen of England, stepping into a role that came with its own set of challenges and, let's face it, a bit more drama than a Shakespearean play. Henry II, crowned in 1154, was not your typical medieval king who preferred jousting over judicious governance. No, Henry was a legal eagle before it was cool, obsessed with law and order at a time when most monarchs were still figuring out how to keep their crowns from toppling off their heads. He was a man who understood that the crown wasn't just a shiny hat, but a symbol of authority that needed constant reinforcement. And Eleanor? Well, she was the queen who knew exactly how to wield influence, not just wear it. Together, they ruled a sprawling empire that stretched from the windswept highlands of Scotland to the sunny vineyards of Aquitaine. The Angevin Empire, as it was called, was a patchwork of territories as diverse as a medieval tapestry, and governing it was no small feat. But Eleanor wasn't just a pretty face in a court full of power-hungry nobles. She was actively involved in the administration, a rare feat for queens of her time who were often more ornamental than operational. One of Eleanor's key roles was managing the vast lands of Aquitaine. Remember, we're talking about a region so rich that its grapes could practically pay taxes. Eleanor understood that Aquitaine's loyalty was crucial for maintaining the empire's stability. She was often on the move, travelling more miles than a medieval Marco Polo to ensure her territories remained loyal to the crown. Henry's reign was marked by a series of reforms that would make even the most seasoned bureaucrat break into a sweat. He introduced the Assize of Clarendon in 1166, a legal reform that laid the groundwork for the modern jury system. And while Henry was busy scribbling down laws, Eleanor was ensuring those laws didn't just stay on parchment, but were implemented across their domains. She wasn't merely a queen consort, but a political operator who could negotiate with the most obstinate of barons or charm the socks off a visiting dignitary. Yet despite their combined political prowess, Henry and Eleanor's marriage was far from a fairy tale. If anything, it was a medieval soap opera with enough intrigue, betrayal, and family feuds to keep chroniclers scribbling furiously. Their relationship was a complex dance of power and passion, one that often saw them at odds rather than in harmony. The dynamic between Eleanor and Henry began to sour as their children grew up. They had 8 in total, a brood that would make any modern-day parent weep with exhaustion. But these weren't just any kids, they were the Plantagenets, a dynasty destined to make the Lannisters look like amateurs. The most notorious of their offspring was Richard the Lionheart, whose legendary status was matched only by his legendary absence from England, and King John, whose reign was about as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Eleanor's role in the family feud is the stuff of legend. By the 170s, tensions between Henry and his sons were higher than a medieval tower. The young princes, feeling more entitled than a reality TV star, wanted more power, and Eleanor found herself caught in the middle. She sided with her sons against Henry in what became known as the Great Revolt of 1173–74. It was like a medieval version of Family Feud, but with the stakes considerably higher than a trophy and bragging rights. The revolt was a messier affair than a medieval banquet gone wrong. Eleanor, using her political acumen, coordinated with her sons to challenge Henry's authority. But let's not sugarcoat it. This was less about familial love and more about power politics. Eleanor's involvement in the revolt was a calculated risk, but one that ultimately led to her capture. Henry, not one to take insubordination lightly, had Eleanor imprisoned for over a decade. She was held in various castles, including Winchester and Sarum, enduring a medieval version of house arrest that would test the patience of a saint. While Eleanor was under lock and key, Henry continued to enforce his rule with an iron fist wrapped in legal parchment. Yet their empire was like a pressure cooker with a faulty valve, and it was only a matter of time before it blew. The constant skirmishes between Henry and his sons drained resources faster than a medieval treasury could replenish them, and the familial discord only bolstered the Angevin Empire's enemies. When Henry died in 1189, Eleanor was released from captivity, proving that you can't keep a good queen down. She emerged from her imprisonment more determined than ever to secure her family's legacy. Richard the Lionheart ascended the throne, and Eleanor became his staunchest supporter. She managed his affairs while he was off fighting in the Third Crusade, ensuring the kingdom didn't crumble in his absence. It was a testament to her resilience and political savvy that she was able to maintain the stability of the realm, even when her sons seemed more interested in fighting each other than their foes. Eleanor's later years were spent as a revered matriarch, Her influence felt across Europe as she deftly maneuvered her family into positions of power and prominence. Her legacy was not just one of royal titles and territories, but of a woman who understood the art of governance in a world dominated by men. She was a queen who played the political game with a finesse that left many a king scrambling to keep up. In the grand saga of Eleanor of Aquitaine, her marriage to Henry II was a chapter filled with both triumph and turmoil, a testament to her indomitable spirit and her unparalleled ability to navigate the turbulent waters of medieval politics. As we leave this chapter of her life, it's clear that Eleanor was not just a queen of legend, but a woman of substance whose story would continue to unfold in ways as unpredictable as the time she lived in. Stay tuned, because the next part of Eleanor's tale promises even more intrigue, power plays, and maybe a few surprises along the way. As Eleanor emerged from her long confinement, she wasn't just another royal walking free, she was a force of nature, unleashed. Imagine an eagle, once caged, now soaring back into the political sky with a wingspan that covered all of England and beyond. You see, Eleanor wasn't just marking time while locked away. She was meticulously planning her next moves, like a grandmaster plotting several games ahead. Her imprisonment, starting in 1173, wasn't your run-of-the-mill medieval dungeon experience. This was the royal version of being grounded, complete with plush accommodations, but none of the freedom. Medieval jailhouse rules for royalty were a peculiar mix of restraint and luxury. Eleanor's prison was more akin to house arrest in various castles, including Winchester and Sarum, not exactly the Tower of London, but not a five-star resort either. She wasn't languishing in some damp cell. Eleanor was in semi-comfortable quarters with enough resources to keep her brain sharper than a knight's sword. This wasn't just a time of reflection, but of influence, as she managed to maintain her sway over her sons, who were as rebellious as a gang of medieval rock stars. Now, how does a queen under lock and key still run the show? The answer lies in Eleanor's unrivaled political acumen and the power of correspondence. Letters were the medieval equivalent of text messages, and Eleanor wielded her pen like a warrior wields a sword. Her missives, carried by trusted envoys, were laced with advice, strategy, and the occasional motherly reprimand. Her sons Richard and John, despite their armoury of issues, often looked to her for guidance. They knew that behind those castle walls was a mind that could outmaneuver any courtier or counsellor. Eleanor had a knack for turning confinement into a strategic advantage. She used her time to build alliances and plot her family's comeback. It's like she was playing a high-stakes game of chess, only the pieces were real people, and the stakes involved crowns and territories. While Henry II thought he had her sidelined, Eleanor was more like a quarterback calling the plays from the bench, and her sons were all too willing to listen. In 1189, when Henry finally kicked the medieval bucket, Eleanor was released, and she didn't skip a beat. Her first order of business? Ensuring that her favourite son Richard took the throne without a hitch. It was as if Eleanor had spent her incarceration sketching out a blueprint for the Angevin Empire's future. With Richard off to the Third Crusade, she stepped up as regent, making sure the kingdom didn't implode while he was off gallivanting in the Holy Land. As regent, Eleanor's role was nothing short of Herculean. Picture her juggling the demands of the English barons, the needs of the common folk, and the ceaseless plotting of the French crown. She was like the medieval version of a CEO, managing crises with the poise of a seasoned diplomat and the decisiveness of a battlefield general. She even managed to keep the treasury afloat at a time when every noble seemed to have a hand in the royal coffers, like kids in a candy store with no adult supervision. Eleanor's regency wasn't just about keeping the lights on. It was about securing her family's legacy. Her political manoeuvring ensured Richard's reign was stable, even if he spent more time abroad than at home. She deftly managed to keep John, her youngest and most slippery son, in check. John's reputation as a notorious schemer was well earned, but Eleanor's influence was one of the few things that could curb his more reckless impulses. Economically, Eleanor understood that the prosperity of the realm was tied to the stability of the crown. She navigated the complex web of feudal allegiances, ensuring that England's wealth was not frittered away by the whims of power-hungry barons. Her ability to negotiate peace treaties and manage diplomatic relations was unparalleled, keeping England relatively stable during a period when peace was as rare as a unicorn sighting. Despite her success, Eleanor's regency was not without its challenges. The Plantagenet Empire was a political powder keg, and Eleanor had to be as cunning as a fox in a henhouse to prevent it from exploding. Her strategies were sometimes ruthless, but when the game is afoot, as Sherlock Holmes would say, one must play to win. Eleanor's understanding of power dynamics was not just about wielding influence, but knowing when to play the long game. Eleanor's later years as regent were a testament to her resilience and ability to adapt. She wasn't just surviving, she was thriving in a political landscape that would have overwhelmed a lesser mind. Her story is one of grit and grace, of a queen who refused to be sidelined by the machinations of kings or the constraints of her gender. In a world where women were often silent queens, Eleanor's voice was heard loud and clear. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Eleanor's tale is far from over, and her impact on the medieval world would continue to ripple through the corridors of power long after she was gone. Her legacy as a queen, regent, and matriarch of one of history's most infamous dynasties is a story still unfolding, like a tapestry that refuses to be completed. Stay tuned, because the next chapter promises even more twists and turns in the saga of Eleanor of Aquitaine, the queen who played the medieval Game of Thrones like no other. As Eleanor's legacy continued to unfold, her later years proved that age was no barrier to ambition. If anything, Eleanor's twilight years were more about lighting up the political landscape of Europe like a fireworks display than fading quietly into the tapestry of history. This grand dame of medieval politics had a knack for staying relevant, and she wielded her influence like a maestro conducting a symphony of power plays and marriage alliances. Let's talk marriage alliances, the medieval equivalent of a strategic merger. Eleanor wasn't just a queen, she was a matchmaker with a penchant for power consolidation. Her children and grandchildren were like pieces on a chessboard, and Eleanor knew exactly how to move them to secure her family's dominance. Take, for instance, her orchestration of Richard the Lionheart's marriage to Berengaria of Navarre in 1191. Now, if you're thinking this was a romantic affair, think again. Eleanor was more focused on the political benefits, securing an ally in Navarre to bolster the Plantagenet position against the ever-encroaching French crown. And speaking of France, Eleanor's grandson, Louis VIII, married Blanche of Castile, another of Eleanor's granddaughters. This wasn't just a matrimonial match, it was a diplomatic masterstroke. By aligning her grandchildren with the French monarchy, Eleanor ensured her legacy extended beyond the English Channel, like a vine creeping over the walls of a castle. Eleanor's travels in her later years were nothing short of epic. Picture this, a septuagenarian queen crisscrossing Europe, defying the limitations of age and the medieval equivalent of a midlife crisis. In 1199, Eleanor made a journey to Castile to bring her granddaughter Blanche to France for her marriage to Louis VIII. This wasn't just a family visit, it was a political mission, and Eleanor undertook it with the vigor of a woman half her age. She traversed the Pyrenees, a feat as daunting as trying to navigate rush-hour traffic with a horse and carriage. While on these diplomatic missions, Eleanor wasn't just playing the doting grandmother, she was ensuring that the Plantagenet influence remained as robust as a well-aged Bordeaux. Her travels were a testament to her enduring commitment to her family's power, and they highlighted her ability to juggle diplomacy with the ease of a circus performer juggling flaming torches. But let's not romanticize Eleanor's later years as a medieval fairy tale. Sure, she was involved in the marriages and alliances that shaped the geopolitical landscape of the time, but this wasn't just about love and harmony. It was about power, influence, and ensuring that the Plantagenet name echoed through the halls of history long after she was gone. Eleanor was playing 4D chess in a world where most were still figuring out checkers. And now, let's address the myth of Eleanor as the medieval supermom. The idea that she was some proto-feminist icon balancing family and politics with perfection is tempting, but reality is a bit messier. Yes, she was a matriarch, but her children were more akin to squabbling heirs than obedient offspring. Richard the Lionheart, for all his legendary status, spent more time on crusade or in captivity than ruling England. Meanwhile, King John was infamous for losing the family's continental lands and getting into more trouble than a medieval prankster with a penchant for mischief. Eleanor's role as a mother was complex. She wasn't baking cookies and mending tunics, she was managing rebellions, negotiating peace treaties, and occasionally grounding her sons from power like a noblewoman grounding her kids from jousting practice. Her influence was undeniable, but it was more about political maneuvering than maternal nurturing. If Eleanor was a supermom, it was more in the vein of a CEO managing a particularly unruly board of directors. The mythologizing of Eleanor as a medieval supermom is appealing, but it glosses over the grit and grind of her reality. She was a queen who understood that power was not just inherited, but earned through shrewd alliances and relentless ambition. Her legend is one of perseverance and political acumen, not just family values and dinner-table diplomacy. Eleanor's later years were defined by her ability to adapt and thrive in a world that was as unpredictable as a medieval weather forecast. She maneuvered through the European political landscape with the finesse of a knight navigating a battlefield, always a step ahead of her rivals. Her legacy is one of a queen who refused to be sidelined by age or circumstance, a woman who played the Game of Thrones with a skill that left many a king in her wake wondering what had just hit them. As we leave this chapter of Eleanor's story, it's clear that her influence stretched far beyond the borders of her realm. She was a queen who redefined what it meant to wield power in a world dominated by men, and her story is a testament to the enduring impact of a woman who refused to be anything less than legendary. Stay tuned, because Eleanor's tale is far from over, and the next chapter promises even more intrigue, alliances, and perhaps a few surprises as the saga of this remarkable queen continues to unfold. As we continue to unravel the tapestry of Eleanor of Aquitaine's legacy, let's sift through the layers of myth and reality. In a world where stories often become larger than life, Eleanor has been painted as everything from a romantic heroine to a political mastermind. But what truly stands out in the annals of history is her unmatched ability to survive and thrive amidst the political upheavals of her time. Eleanor's life was less a fairy tale and more a series of strategic maneuvers that would make a modern chess champion envious. Her survival wasn't just about dodging arrows or avoiding dungeons, it was about outsmarting an entire generation of rulers. And let's be clear, she wasn't playing on an easy setting. The medieval political landscape was a bit like a game of Risk, only with more bloodshed and fewer dice. From her position as Duchess of Aquitaine to her dual crowns as Queen of France and England, Eleanor's journey was one of calculated risks and bold moves. Take her annulment from Louis VII in 1152. It wasn't just a personal decision, it was a political power play. By ending a marriage that bore no fruit, literally and politically, Eleanor ensured her independence and the control of her vast territories. It was a move that took Aquitaine out of France's grasp and into the hands of the Plantagenets, reshuffling Europe's power dynamics more effectively than a medieval coup. Then there's her marriage to Henry II of England, a union that was less about starry-eyed romance and more about consolidating power. Together, they ruled over an empire that stretched from Scotland to the Pyrenees, a kingdom so vast it would make even the most ambitious empire builder break into a sweat. But Eleanor wasn't just a queen consort, she was a co-ruler, actively participating in the administration of their territories. She understood that true power wasn't just in wearing a crown but in dictating the terms of kingship. Eleanor's political savvy was most evident during her time as regent, while Richard the Lionheart was off crusading. Her regency wasn't just about sitting pretty on the throne. It was about maintaining the stability of a kingdom that was more fractious than a medieval family reunion. She deftly navigated the treacherous waters of feudal allegiance, ensuring that England remained a formidable power even in Richard's absence. It's a testament to her leadership that the kingdom didn't crumble like a poorly baked pie. But let's not pretend Eleanor's life was all strategic victories and political triumphs. Her relationship with her children, particularly her sons Richard and John, was as turbulent as the English Channel on a stormy day. Richard, for all his lion-hearted bravado, was often more interested in crusading than ruling, while John had a knack for losing more land than a medieval cartographer. Yet, Eleanor's influence on them was undeniable. She was the guiding force behind their reigns, the steady hand steering the ship through choppy waters. Eleanor's legacy isn't just about her tangible impact, it's also about how she's been remembered through the ages. Romanticized tales of her life paint her as a medieval superwoman, a queen who balanced power and family with grace and ease. But the reality was far more complex. She was a woman who understood the harsh realities of the medieval world and played the Game of Thrones with a deftness that left many a king floundering. Her survival through political upheavals was as much about her resilience as it was about her ability to adapt. She lived through wars, imprisonments, and family feuds, emerging each time with her influence intact. It's no wonder that Eleanor has been both revered and reviled throughout history, her story a testament to the enduring power of a woman who refused to be defined by the men around her. As we wrap up our exploration of Eleanor's legacy, it's clear that she was more than just a queen, she was a force of nature. Her life was a masterclass in political strategy, her influence felt long after her time. Eleanor of Aquitaine was a woman who understood the art of governance in a world dominated by men, a queen who played the medieval Game of Thrones with a finesse that left many wondering who was really in charge. In the end, Eleanor's story is a reminder that history is as much about the myths we create as the realities we uncover. Her legacy is a blend of romance and reality, a tapestry woven with threads of power, ambition, and resilience. As we bid farewell to this remarkable queen, let's remember her not just as a legend, but as a woman who shaped the course of history with her indomitable spirit and unyielding determination. Eleanor of Aquitaine, the queen who refused to be anything less than legendary, will continue to inspire and intrigue for generations to come. The sun peeks over the horizon, casting its golden light on the sprawling city of Harappa. You're a priest in the Indus Valley civilization, sipping some freshly drawn water as you prepare for a bustling day in one of the most economically vibrant societies of the ancient world. Forget swords and shields. Your people are more about trade and tranquility. It's a world where the sound of chisel on stone and the murmur of traders haggling over lapis lazuli and cotton fill the air rather than the clashing of combat. Now, let's talk agriculture. It's the beating heart of your civilization. By 2500 BCE, the Indus Valley isn't just feeding Harappa, it's supporting a network of cities that stretch for miles. Your fields are lush with wheat, barley, and those little black sesame seeds that make your food so fragrant. You nod in approval at the irrigation channels. These aren't just ditches. They're marvels of engineering that make sure every drop of the precious Indus River is put to good use. Indeed, your people figured out how to coax the most from the land, avoiding the pitfalls that would later topple mighty empires. It's a lesson future civilizations seem doomed to forget repeatedly. As a priest, your role isn't just about mumbling incantations. You're a linchpin in the community, ensuring that the harvest rituals are observed and the gods remain benevolent. There's no need for a sword when you've got divine favor on your side, right? As you wrap up your early morning duties at the altar, you can't help but appreciate the spiritual pragmatism of your society. The lack of grandiose temples might surprise a time-traveling outsider, but here it's all about balance and harmony with the world, a philosophy that keeps your city humming along without the constant threat of war. Moving from the fields to the streets, you're greeted by the scent of spices and a cacophony of voices. Harappa is a marketplace of dreams, where the economy thrives on trade routes that stretch from Mesopotamia to the steppes of Central Asia. You're more likely to run into a caravan loaded with copper or turquoise than a battalion of soldiers. It's no small feat, keeping the peace in a land this rich, but the Indus Valley folks have mastered the art of diplomacy. You raise an eyebrow at the merchants haggling over the price of carnelian beads, semi-precious stones that are practically the currency of cool in this era. How did your society manage to get these without a single arrow fired? Simple. By trading what others want, like cotton. Yes, that's right. Harappans are among the first to spin cotton into the fabric, an export as valuable as gold in many trading circles. You stroll past the bustling docks, where goods are loaded onto boats that navigate the intricate river networks. This is no idle economy. It's a well-oiled machine that thrives on diversity and cooperation. The absence of fortifications around the city isn't an oversight. It's a testament to the enduring peace your people have cultivated. While elsewhere in the ancient world, building walls was practically a national pastime, here you've decided that cooperation beats confrontation. It's not just idealistic fluff, it's a strategic choice that pays off in trade wins and prosperity. The sun climbs higher, casting long shadows through the meticulously planned streets. You can't help but marvel at the city's layout, straight streets that intersect at right angles, a testament to urban planning that wouldn't be out of place in a modern metropolis. You meet with fellow priests and city leaders, discussing everything from crop yields to upcoming trade delegations. Your role in these councils underscores the deeply interconnected nature of religion, governance, and economy in Harappa. It's not just about keeping the gods happy, it's about maintaining the delicate balance that keeps your civilization thriving. As you make your way to the granaries, you pass by bustling workshops where artisans skillfully create the pottery and jewellery that are the envy of the ancient world. The craftsmanship is top-notch, driven not only by artistic flair but by economic necessity. These aren't mere trinkets, they are the lifeblood of trade networks that span continents. You nod in appreciation at the beadmakers, whose intricate designs will soon adorn the necks of faraway aristocrats. The lack of a warrior class means resources are channeled into more productive endeavours. You chuckle at the thought. While other civilizations are busy building empires on the backs of war horses, you're expanding yours with the quiet power of trade. It's a peaceful yet potent approach, and it's paying dividends. Your civilization is a mosaic of cultures and ideas, a melting pot of innovation that stands as a testament to the power of collaboration over conquest. As the day wears on, you can't help but reflect on the rhythms of life in Harappa. It's a society where the ploughshare truly is mightier than the sword, where prosperity is measured not in conquests, but in the diversity and reach of trade. You've got no need for mythologizing bloody battles when the real legends are the trade agreements that keep your world spinning. As you head back towards your dwelling, the sun begins its descent, casting a warm glow over the city. You pass by a group of children playing, their laughter mingling with the distant calls of traders concluding their business for the day. It's a fitting reminder of the stability that trade and agriculture have brought to your world, a stability that future generations will look back on with envy. You end your day with a sense of quiet pride. In a world where might often makes right, your society has carved out a different path. By weaving together the threads of trade, agriculture, and spirituality, you've created a tapestry that's as durable as it is beautiful. And as you prepare for the rituals of evening, you know that while you may not wield the sword, you hold something far more enduring, the power of peace. As you ponder the day's fading light, there's a lot more to unpack about the role you play in this ancient soap opera called the Indus Valley Civilization. Your life as a priest isn't just about leading chants and burning incense in the hope that the gods are in a good mood. You're part of the social glue that holds Harappa together, a figure of influence in a society that's got its social hierarchy down to a science, literally. In Harappa, your position is somewhere between a rock star and a municipal planner. You're not just the spiritual guide, you're a key player in the civic life of a city that's home to maybe 23,000 souls, according to some estimates. And while you're not exactly the CEO of Harappa, you're definitely on the board of directors. This city is a well-oiled machine, a place where social roles are as structured as the grid-like streets. Ah, those streets. Straight as an arrow, they intersect at right angles, a feat of urban planning that would make even the most meticulous modern city planner shed a tear of joy. Forget labyrinthine medieval towns. Harappa's layout is the ancestor of today's city grids. Let's talk about that undeciphered script, the Harappan code that's tantalizingly out of reach. Think of it as the ancient world's biggest tease, a script that's as mysterious as it is silent. You're surrounded by this enigmatic writing, etched onto seals and pottery, whispering secrets of trade deals and possibly even bureaucratic love letters. But alas, the code remains unbroken, leaving modern scholars pulling their hair out. While your society didn't leave behind epic poems or grandiose monuments, these tiny inscriptions are your legacy, hinting at a complex life we're still struggling to fully understand. Now, about that social hierarchy. The priesthood is just one cog in a complex societal wheel. You've got the merchants, the artisans, the farmers, and the labourers, each contributing to the city's dynamic economy. It's a system that demands cooperation and interdependence, where every class plays a role in keeping the city's heart beating. You're like a conductor in an orchestra, ensuring that each section plays in harmony, from the granary managers to the bead makers. Speaking of granaries, these aren't just oversized bread boxes, they're the backbone of Harappa's economy. Picture massive brick structures, meticulously designed to store the surplus from those fertile fields. With advanced drainage systems that could rival anything a modern civil engineer might concoct, the city ensures that even in the worst monsoon, the grain stays dry. It's a marvel of engineering that speaks volumes about the priorities of your society, where food security is a matter of civic pride and survival. And let's not forget those drainage systems. The streets of Harappa aren't just paved with good intentions, they're lined with some of the earliest known sanitation infrastructure. We're talking about brick-lined channels that carry waste away from the city, a feature that many modern cities could stand to take notes from. The Harappans didn't just throw up their hands and say, "Oh well, let's just flood the streets." Nope, they built a drainage system that kept the city fresh and functional. This kind of urban planning isn't just about comfort, it's a testament to the Harappans' foresight and ingenuity. In a world where neighbouring civilizations were still figuring out how to not drown in their own waste, Harappa stood as a beacon of innovation. You can almost hear the architects of the time saying, "If we can't write our names in history, we'll certainly build them." Your influence as a priest extends beyond the spiritual realm. It's woven into the very fabric of civic life. When you're not leading rituals or advising on spiritual matters, you're meeting with city leaders, weighing in on everything from irrigation projects to trade negotiations. It's a role that demands both divine insight and practical wisdom, a balancing act that keeps the city running smoothly. As you navigate through the city, you can't help but marvel at the bustling life around you. From the workshops where artisans are turning clay into intricate pottery, to the markets where traders haggle over goods from distant lands, Harappa is alive with the hum of commerce and creativity. It's a city built not on conquest, but on collaboration, where the true power lies in the ability to connect and cooperate. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the city's grid-like streets. You pause to take in the scene, a moment of reflection on the rhythms that define Harappa. Here, in a civilization that's more about trade routes than battlefields, you're reminded of the enduring power of peace. It's a lesson etched into the very stones of the city, a testament to a way of life that values harmony over hubris. And so, as the day winds down and the city settles into the quiet of evening, you find yourself contemplating the future. In a world where civilizations rise and fall like the tides, the Indus Valley stands as a testament to the power of human ingenuity and cooperation. While the mysteries of the past remain, one thing is clear. Harappa is a city that's built to last, a place where the power of peace is as tangible as the bricks under your feet. As you retreat to your quarters, the sound of laughter and distant conversations drifts through the air, a reminder of the vibrant life that pulses through the city. It's a fitting soundtrack to the story of Harappa, a tale of innovation, collaboration, and the quiet strength of a society that chose diplomacy over dominance. As the evening breeze sweeps through Harappa, you find yourself at the heart of a civilization where spirituality is woven into the everyday fabric of life. But forget the grandiose image of priest-kings ruling with divine authority here. Religion is less about celestial mysteries and more about practical rituals. Sure, the idea of a peaceful utopia led by benevolent spiritual leaders is attractive, but the reality? Well, it's a bit more grounded. Let's dive into the spiritual practices that keep Harappan society ticking, starting with the ritual baths that are less about divine cleansing and more about civic duty. First up, the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro, which is like the ancient world's version of a luxury spa, minus the cucumber slices. This massive, waterproofed tank, measuring about 12 by 7 meters and 2.4 meters deep, was one of the architectural marvels of its time. And while some might imagine it as a sacred pool for the purification of the soul, think of it more like a civic amenity, a place for communal rituals that reinforced social cohesion. It's a testament to Harappan priorities, clean bodies, clear minds, and a functioning society. Let's bust a myth here. This wasn't a scene out of a New Age festival with everyone chanting in unison under a full moon. The Great Bath probably had more in common with a community centre than a temple. The water was cool, the limestone-bricked walls were meticulously maintained, and the atmosphere was more about maintaining societal norms than invoking divine visions. It was about keeping the community together, one ritual dunk at a time. You see, in a city without massive temples, these baths served as the spiritual hubs. Now, on to the tantalizing tidbits of animal sacrifices, because what's ancient religion without a little bit of drama, right? The evidence is scattered and sparse, but there are hints that the Harappans might have dabbled in offering up livestock to the gods. Animal remains, particularly cattle and goats, have been found at various sites, hinting at possible sacrificial practices. But let's not go imagining scenes from Game of Thrones. These were likely modest affairs, more like making a polite offering than staging a spectacle. In a society that thrived on trade and agriculture, sacrificing an animal wasn't just a spiritual act, it was an economic decision. Offering up livestock would have been a significant gesture, a way to appeal for favour, or perhaps to ensure a bountiful harvest. It's a reminder that religion in Harappa was as much about securing practical benefits as it was about spiritual fulfillment. You might call it divine diplomacy, keeping the cosmic scales balanced with a well-timed offering. But don't imagine the priests here as just solemn intermediaries between humans and gods. They were more like spiritual managers, ensuring that the rituals ran smoothly and the community stayed in sync. It's a role that demanded charisma, diplomacy, and a knack for logistics. And while they might not have wielded swords, they certainly held sway over the spiritual and social realms. Another quirky aspect of Harappan religion is the absence of monumental temples or grand statues of deities. Instead, you have amulets, seals, and small figurines, some depicting what could be proto-Shiva figures or fertility goddesses. These aren't the grand idols of later Indian culture, but rather more personal, portable icons. It's like comparing a blockbuster movie to an indie film. One's about the spectacle, the other about intimate storytelling. These artifacts suggest a religion that was decentralized, personal, and perhaps even a touch eclectic. There's no unifying pantheon, no centralized religious authority, just a mosaic of beliefs reflecting the diverse culture of the Indus Valley. It's a spiritual landscape that's as intricate and varied as the seals and amulets themselves. Speaking of seals, these small, carved objects are like the ancient world's business cards, stamped with symbols and animals that might have served both religious and commercial purposes. Imagine them as the Swiss army knives of Harappan society, useful for trade, communication, and maybe even invoking a little divine favour on the side. It's another example of how practical and spiritual life were intertwined in Harappa. As the shadows lengthen, you consider the role of these religious practices in maintaining Harappa's social harmony. In a civilization without the constant drumbeat of war, religion provided a framework for unity and cooperation. It was about reinforcing social bonds, not enforcing dogma. And while we might never fully unlock the secrets of Harappan spirituality, one thing is clear: it was a religion that served the living. So, as the city settles into the quiet of evening, you're left pondering the rhythms of a society that found balance between the mundane and the mystical. Harappa's priests weren't ruling with an iron fist or divine decree. They were facilitating a complex social dance where every ritual and offering ensured the community moved to the same beat. It's a testament to a civilization that thrived on harmony and practicality, a place where spiritual life was as much about community as it was about divinity. And with that, the day in Harappa winds to a close, the echoes of ritual chants and the quiet murmur of the great bath fading into the night. The mysteries of Harappan religion remain, tantalizingly just out of reach, but the legacy of this ancient civilization endures. A society built on cooperation, not conquest, where the true power lay in the ability to connect, collaborate, and coexist. As the echoes of ritual chants fade and the night settles over Harappa, it's time to dive into the city's political scene. A landscape where power wasn't concentrated in the hands of a single ruler, but rather dispersed among a network of influential figures. Think of it as a kind of proto-democracy, minus the voting booths and campaign ads. Here, the power dynamic is as fluid as the Indus River itself, ebbing and flowing through a decentralized governance model that would give any wannabe dictator a headache. Let's pause for a myth-busting moment. The idea of a supreme leader, a grand poobah sitting on a throne and issuing edicts, is more fantasy than fact when it comes to the Indus Valley. Archaeologists have yet to unearth palaces or monuments dedicated to any one ruler, which is a pretty solid clue that Harappa wasn't into the whole autocratic regime thing. Instead, the city ran on a system of collective governance, a concept that might sound like a pipe dream in our modern, power-centralized world, but it was a reality for the Harappans. Imagine a council of elders or influential priests and merchants, people who knew how to navigate both the spiritual and material worlds. They were the ones pulling the strings, ensuring that trade routes remained open and that the granaries were stocked. These weren't power-hungry overlords. They were more like civic-minded managers who recognized that cooperation was the secret sauce in their societal recipe. This decentralized system is fascinating because it was likely driven by necessity as much as philosophy. When your civilization stretches across roughly 1.25 million square kilometers, from the foothills of the Himalayas to the Arabian Sea, central control becomes a logistical nightmare. Rather than build an empire, the Harappans opted for a network of cities, each one a node in a web of commerce and culture. It's as if they took a page from the playbook of modern startups: stay nimble, stay connected, and avoid the red tape. Now, you might be wondering just how this decentralized power structure worked in practice. Well, without the benefit of a written constitution or even a decipherable script to guide us, we rely on archaeological evidence and a bit of educated guesswork. The city's grid-like layout, for instance, suggests a level of urban planning that required cooperation across different sectors of society. From sanitation systems to trade logistics, the Harappans had to work together, pooling resources and expertise to keep the city humming. Picture this: a bustling marketplace where merchants and priests, two of the most powerful classes, rub shoulders, exchanging not just goods but ideas. You can almost hear the bartering over carnelian beads and the whispered negotiations for the next big trade expedition. This wasn't just commerce, it was diplomacy in action, a way to maintain peace and prosperity without a standing army. Speaking of armies, the absence of military fortifications is another puzzle piece in the Harappan governance jigsaw. While other civilizations were busy fortifying their cities with walls and moats, Harappa was wide open. It's a bold move that speaks volumes about their approach to security, one that favored alliances and trade pacts over battlements and warfare. The Harappans knew that a network of mutual interests was a far sturdier defense than stone walls. Of course, this doesn't mean that Harappa was a utopia free of conflict. Human nature being what it is, there were undoubtedly disputes and power struggles. But instead of resolving these through bloodshed, the Harappans likely employed a blend of negotiation and spiritual guidance. It's a society where the line between politics and religion was as blurred as the edges of an ancient map, with priests playing a dual role as both spiritual leaders and political influencers. Let's not forget the economic backbone of this political system: trade. Harappa's prosperity hinged on its ability to connect with distant lands, from Mesopotamia to Central Asia. This trade network wasn't just about exchanging goods. It was a conduit for ideas, technologies, and cultural innovations. It's a reminder that the Harappans weren't isolated. They were global players in a prehistoric world economy, savvy enough to leverage their agricultural surplus into a thriving trade empire. And here's where the myth of the benevolent priestly class gets a reality check. While it's tempting to romanticize these leaders as philosopher kings, the truth is likely more complex. Sure, they had spiritual authority, but they were also shrewd operators who understood the art of the deal long before it became a bestseller. They knew that maintaining their influence required a delicate balancing act, keeping both the gods and the merchants happy. A task that was as much about pragmatism as it was about piety. As the evening wears on, Harappa's decentralized governance model reveals itself to be a marvel of social engineering. In a world where power often corrupts, the Harappans found a way to distribute it across a society that valued collaboration over coercion. It's a system that might seem alien to us today, but it was the secret to their success, a blueprint for stability in an unstable world. And as you ponder the quiet streets of Harappa, with their intricate drainage systems and bustling workshops, you're left with a sense of wonder at this ancient civilization's ability to thrive without the trappings of kings and castles. In a society where power was shared and prosperity was a collective goal, the Harappans crafted a legacy of peace and cooperation that would echo through the ages. So, as the night deepens and Harappa settles into slumber, the city's silent streets whisper tales of a society that turned the politics of power on its head. In a world that often equates might with right, the Harappans remind us that sometimes the greatest strength lies in unity, not in domination. And with that, we leave Harappa's political landscape to rest for another day, knowing that the story of this remarkable civilization is far from over. Now, as the amber glow of the day gives way to the dark velvet of night, we pull back the curtain on the Indus Valley civilization's final act. It's the grand mystery that has left historians scratching their heads and archaeologists digging with a fervor bordering on obsession. How did a civilization as sophisticated as Harappa's, one that sprawled over 1.25 million square kilometers, manage to vanish from the world stage with nary a sword raised or a wall torn down? Buckle up, my friend, because we're diving into a historical whodunit that rivals any detective novel. First up on the suspect list, climate change. No, it's not just the buzzword of our modern era, it's been a villain in the human story for millennia. Around 1800 BCE, the climate took a turn that would spell trouble for the Indus Valley. The monsoons, those vital seasonal rains that Harappans had depended on like clockwork, began to falter. The dependable rhythm of wet and dry seasons became erratic, like a drummer who suddenly can't keep time. River systems shifted, and those lush fields of barley and wheat found themselves parched and choking under an unforgiving sun. These were no minor meteorological hiccups. The Gagahakra River, thought to be the lifeblood of many Indus cities, began to dry up. Without these water highways, the intricate irrigation systems, the pride of Harappan engineering, were left high and dry, literally. The agricultural backbone of the civilization buckled under the stress, and with it, the economic structure began to wobble. It's a harsh reminder that no matter how advanced a society becomes, it's always at the mercy of the natural world. Mother Nature, as it turns out, is the ultimate power broker. But wait, there's more. Enter tectonic shifts, stage left. The Indus Valley sits on a geological fault line, and tremors were as much a part of Harappan life as trade caravans and ritual baths. There's evidence to suggest that seismic activity might have played a role in the civilization's decline. Earthquakes could have altered river courses, leading to catastrophic flooding or, conversely, leaving cities stranded far from their water sources. Picture a bustling port city suddenly finding itself a landlocked relic as rivers change course. It's like waking up to find your beachfront property is now a desert shack. This geological upheaval would have compounded the agricultural woes, pushing an already strained society closer to the edge. And as if that weren't enough, there's the trade angle. Remember, Harappa society was a finely tuned machine that thrived on its extensive trade networks. But as climate and tectonics wreaked havoc on the land, these networks likely frayed. Trade partners like Mesopotamia had their own troubles to deal with, and as economic ties loosened, the lifeline that sustained Harappan prosperity began to unravel. It's the ancient world's version of a supply chain crisis, and it hit Harappa like a ton of bricks. Now, let's take a moment to debunk a romanticized image, the idea that Harappa's decline was a peaceful fade-out, like a civilization that simply decided to retire and cool its heels. The reality was probably messier. Evidence suggests that, as resources became scarce, internal pressures mounted. The lack of a centralized authority meant that there was no single figure to rally the people or manage the crisis. Instead, cities might have become insular, focusing on local survival rather than collective resilience. As people moved in search of more fertile lands or stable resources, the urban centers emptied. It wasn't a mass exodus, but a slow bleed, a gradual depopulation that left once thriving cities eerily silent. It's a poignant reminder that civilizations don't always fall with a bang. Sometimes they simply drift into the shadows, leaving behind echoes and enigmas. So, what's the legacy of the Indus Valley civilization in this grand historical tapestry? Despite the decline, the Harappans left an indelible mark. Their achievements in urban planning, sanitation, and trade were light years ahead of their time. The grid-like streets of Harappa, the advanced drainage systems, and the peaceful trade relations serve as blueprints for future societies. It's a testament to their genius that aspects of their civilization would be mirrored in urban centers thousands of years later. And then there's the cultural legacy. The tantalizing traces of Harappan civilization can be seen in the traditions and practices that permeate the Indian subcontinent to this day. Their spirit of cooperation over conquest, their focus on commerce and community, echoes in the bustling markets and vibrant communities that thrive across South Asia. The seals and amulets, the artistic expressions that remain, hint at a cultural richness that, while faded, never truly vanished. As we wrap up our time in the Indus Valley, it's clear that Harappa was more than the sum of its bricks and barter. It was a civilization that embraced complexity and nuance, balancing the demands of nature, commerce, and community with a deftness that still inspires. The mystery of its decline only adds to its allure, a puzzle that invites endless fascination and speculation. In a world where history often glorifies the conquerors and the empires built on blood and bronze, the Indus Valley civilization stands apart. Its story is one of quiet resilience, of a society that chose diplomacy over domination, innovation over intimidation. It's a legacy that whispers through the ages, reminding us that the true measure of a civilization isn't in the battles it fought, but in the peace it sustained. And so, as the night deepens over the ancient ruins and the whispers of history fade into the wind, we leave Harappa with a sense of wonder and a nod to its enduring legacy. The Indus Valley civilization, with its blend of practicality and enigma, invites us to ponder the infinite complexities of our own societies, echoes of a past that remains as relevant today as it was millennia ago.